Namaskar, good afternoon everyone. My name is Ankita Betwal and I am the Communications Officer at CESIF, and I would like to extend my heartiest welcome to everyone present here today. Thank you so much for being here. Today our seminar is on geopolitics and foreign engagement in Nepal, and we have two panels scheduled for today, and in between we also have two very short presentations from our researchers at CESIF. Talking about CESIF, Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism is a non-profit, autonomous and independent private research institution serving in the public interest with significant independence from any donor or interest group and autonomy from the government. Our mission is to help the government and the society create a democratic, secure and just society by making informed, transparent decisions about policies and practices. Talking about the program today, as you can see, it is geopolitical foreign engagement in Nepal. As of late, Nepal has been at the flashpoint of geopolitical tensions, with US and China visibly increasing their influence in the country. Firstly, it was the MCC Pact ratification by the Parliament of Nepal, and then the talks over the SPP agreement. Moreover, China's engagement in Nepal through various official visits and the increasing interference over Nepal's internal politics and the implementation of BRI. Nepal has been in the forefront for a while now when it comes to geopolitical issues. And China's increasing involvement in Nepal's politics and the affairs of the country have not made the US-Indo camp very skeptical about the country's relationship with either. So realizing our need to discuss upon these issues, we have organized this session today. And we have invited all our stakeholders today from different fields to discuss the geopolitical dynamics of foreign actors and their recent trends in Nepal today. Without further ado, I would like to now invite the chairperson of CESIF, Ambassador Vijay Karna, to deliver the welcome speech for today's program.
This seminar, as Ankita said, about the different stakeholders together to discuss about the current status of foreign engagement in Nepal and how Nepal is responding to pressing issues coming to the global, regional, and bilateral issues. The intensification of geopolitical competition between the big and rivalry power has left Nepal at the crossroad of pursuing its objective of infrastructure development, economic prosperity, while also promoting its national and security interest. Although the increasing interest of global powers in Nepal has opened up opportunity, moment for investment opportunity to meet its development needs, the pursuit of effective foreign policy and diplomatic practices, if not executed to balance its relation with the foreign actors, is likely to result in a geopolitical instability. What we are observing since 3 to 4 years, Nepal has been in the center of some global power as well as regional power. And our response to the managing all these powerful countries as per our national interest is a little bit very confusing and very much, I can say, unstable. And it affects our own national interest. So in this context, we have invited all the panelists, some of the different sectors, some former diplomats, practitioners, as well as other stakeholders, researchers, to discuss about all these things. And government officials, we have invited some people from Finance Ministry, Foreign Ministry, and other stakeholders to discuss all these issues. We have also invited some diplomatic missions in Kathmandu, including Embassy of China, Embassy of India, Embassy of USA, and other diplomatic mission in Kathmandu. So thank you very much, and again welcome you all to make your presence in the discussion. We are expecting your active participation in discussion and deliberation. Thank you very much.
Before we begin our panel formally, we have a very special announcement to make. We at CESIF have been waiting for this day for quite some time now. As you all can see, there are 2 books on the table. These are our research series that have been published. These are all the research that the researchers at CESIF have been working very hard for the past few years. The first issue of the series is Nepal-India cross-border relations in the contemporary context. It includes various research findings on cross-border relations, changing perceptions and dynamics of broader Nepal-India migration dynamics and GESI dynamics of Nepal-India border, among others. The second issue of the series is foreign engagement in Nepal and Nepal-China cross-border relations. It includes findings of various research on dynamics of foreign engagement at federal and provincial level, geopolitical and infrastructure development, Nepal-China cross-border relations in the later period, as well as the analysis of transit and transport agreement between Nepal and China. These books are all available here today for you all to take. We would really like your feedback on these books as well. Moving ahead, the first panel that we have today is on geopolitical competition in Nepal. Prior to the panel, to provide us a brief background of the trends of foreign engagement and foreign exchange in Nepal, I would like to invite our researcher and program officer, Mr. Arpan Gelal, for his presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arpan Gelal, researcher and program officer at CESIF. Before beginning the panel discussion, I'll briefly present some key trends and events on geopolitics and foreign engagements in Nepal. First, I'll talk on some of the key geopolitical events that happened recently in Nepal. The geopolitical rivalry of global powers, the United States and China, during parliamentary ratification of the MCC, signaled the heightened political sensitivity in Nepal. While US threatened it could even review ties with Nepal if Nepal fails to ratify the compact, China immediately reacted on MCC, claiming it to be a Pandora box, and opposed America's coercive diplomacy in Nepal. After the House passed the MCC compact, China said they have noted the decision. Next, the implementation of BRI has been halted. Nepal signed China's flagship BRI initiative in 2017, but its implementation has remained in limbo. Immediately after ratification of the MCC, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a visit to Kathmandu. Many expected his visit would center around pushing the implementation of some projects under BRI. However, no deals were made except feasibility study of Nepal-China cross-border railway. Similarly, amid most controversy whether SPP is a part of America's larger Indo-Pacific strategy, Nepal government decided not to be a part of SPP. While China feared Nepal's membership to SPP as a threat to its security and strategic interests, it also surfaced the immaturity in Nepal's political landscape to conduct diplomatic practices. Meanwhile, it also dragged Nepal army into controversy. Moreover, in the later years, Nepal has been witnessing the visits of state officials from China and the US at very high frequency, including from India. This signifies the heightened geostrategic interest of power blocs in Nepal. This has left Nepal at a crossroads of opportune movement to attract foreign investment to fulfill its agenda of prosperity, while also promoting its own national and strategic interests. Finally, Nepal's foreign policy and diplomatic practice is largely dictated by the ideological orientation of the ruling party in Nepal. while KP Sharma Oli's government was largely favoring North with intensified engagement with China, with the then Nepal Communist Party, current Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Dewa is regarded closer to the United States and India. After Dewa became the Prime Minister in July 2021, Chinese adopted policy of non-engagement with Nepali state institutions for an extended period of time. Talking about the current scenario, the visit of Chairman of Standing Committee of National People's Congress of the People's Republic of China, Mr. Li Chansu, 2 weeks ago signals crucial development in Nepal-China relations. First, Nepal's red signal to the BRI. While China has long been insisting on the implementation of projects under BRI, not a single project has been initiated in Nepal under this framework. Nepal has been focusing on grants while China has been insisting on loans. As per the knowledgeable sources, during Li Chansu's visit with Prime Minister Dewa and Foreign Minister Naren Khadka and other officials, it was strongly condemned that Nepal would not accept loans to implement BRI projects. This raises speculations whether the chapter of implementation of BRI has ended, at least temporarily. Second is China's attempt to extend relationship with Congress. Especially since 2017, China has been using the leftist forces as a leeway to extend their interest in Nepal and has been taking initiatives to reunify the split Nepal Communist Party. However, since earlier this year, China is attempting to deepen its relations with Nepali Congress. Third, increasing influence on state institutions. China has been exerting its influence in multiple Nepali state institutions to strengthen its foothold. Li Chansu signed an MOU on parliamentary cooperation between the two countries to strengthen cooperation under the framework of international and regional parliamentary organizations, including the Inter-Parliamentary Union, on matters of common interest and high-level visits and exchanges among other legislatures. This aid to Xi Jinping's announcement of a strategic partnership with Nepal in 2019. And finally, recently, China has opened up 2 border points, Rasuagari and Tatopani, that remained partially closed since 2020, coinciding with Chansu's visit. This remarks another attempt from China to relocate Nepal within its sphere. Talking about other Chinese engagements, the prime concern is President Vidya Devi Bhandari's participation at a GSI conference. A week ago, President Bhandari delivered a speech in a Global Security Initiative conference promoted by the Chinese Communist Party, despite reservations from the government. It is claimed that it was an attempt from President against Nepal's clear policy of non-alignment against any security, military, and defense alliances. Second, Nepal also received high priority in China's new Global Development Initiative. China, under its Global Development Initiative, selected 2 projects from Nepal few days ago. Nepal has remained among 2 countries to be selected for more than 1 project. This indicates China's strategic importance to Nepal. Third, the intensification of Tibet issue. Security issues related to Tibet has remained the central factor regarding China's engagements in Nepal. China is concerned if Nepali land is used for anti-Chinese activities, and it seeks assurance from government officials on one China policy in every exchange visits. During Chansu's visit, he thanked Nepal for unfailing support for China's position on the Taiwan question and issues concerning Xinjiang and human rights. Recently, on May this year, visit of a US delegation led by Under Secretary Urja Jia to Tibetan refugee camps in Kathmandu attracted Chinese concerns and reservations. Nepal government mentioned it was not aware of our visit at the refugee camps. Talking about the trend of US engagements in Nepal, its engagements are directed to keep Nepal under its sphere of influence. The US wants Nepal to remain its faithful partner, which Nepal has been since a longer part of bilateral relationship, serving its strategic interest. The US remained concerned on anti-nationalist rhetoric of the MCC Compact and its diluted image among the faction of Nepali population. To revive the status quo, it sees enhanced assistance and strengthened people-to-people relation as a leeway. Next is the evolution of US independent Nepal policy. With the series of high-level visits and heightened engagement on other spheres, US has renewed its policy towards South Asia, including Nepal. The US, for a longer period of time, framed its Nepal policy through Indian lens. This renewed approach entails dual objective of promotion of US values amid increasing Chinese footholds in the region and strengthen bilateral engagements to strengthen its global presence. Moreover, Its engagements are directed to counter Chinese presence. The major aim of increasing American engagements in South Asia, including Nepal, is to counter Chinese influence in the region. With the announcement of Xi Jinping's neighborhood policy, China accelerated its engagement in neighborhood for stability, security, and connectivity. This has enhanced the geopolitical and strategic interest of both countries. Furthermore, US is also concerned on regional security. The US has directed its focus to Indo-Pacific region. With the gradual change in world power dynamics, with the launch of Indo-Pacific strategy and other security alliances like Quad, the US is trying to exert influence in South Asia to deepen its falling presence and revive its falling image. Being an old bilateral partner with strategic importance, the US has been increasing its engagement in Nepal. US also wants a domination in infrastructural network in Nepal. With China's increasing investment in infrastructure and connectivity in Nepal, the US has increased its investment in infrastructural network, the MCC grant being the recent example of the same. Now talking about India's engagement. Prime Minister Modi, after swearing in as Prime Minister in 2014, announced neighborhood first policy as critical part of India's foreign policy. He has repeatedly mentioned Nepal to be in the top of India's neighborhood first policy. As a buffer between India and China, Nepal remains strategically significant to assert India's leadership in the region. Moreover, Modi has made 5 visits to Nepal till date. This is not only symbolic to emphasize Nepal's priority in India's foreign policy, but has geopolitical implications. In his visit to Lumbini in last May, he laid foundation stone of Indian Buddhist Center. This comes to a time when Chinese have been expanding their investment in infrastructure in and around Lumbini. India also wants to strengthen its shipping foothold in Nepal. India has experienced shipping control in Nepal, especially after 2015, which intensified after formation of KP Oli's government. India sees increasing Chinese presence as a threat to its leadership in South Asia, including Nepal. It has used investment on infrastructure and connectivity, along other sectors to curb the Chinese presence, including the petroleum pipelines, connectivity projects, road infrastructure, integrated custom points, among others. India has manifested its reluctance to buy electricity generated by Chinese funded projects or constructed by Chinese companies. Furthermore, India is focusing more on BIMSTEC and BBIN initiative for sub-regional and regional cooperation under its leadership. In last April, during Prime Minister Dewa's visit to India, a joint vision statement was launched for joint power generation development in Nepal and cross-border transmission lines within BBIN. Finally, regarding the future scenario of geopolitics and foreign engagements in Nepal, Nepal will face assertive policy and increased engagement for China in various political and economic spheres, as it is seeking to revive the political space which it enjoyed in the Prime Ministership of KP Sharma Oli. It will try to extend relationship with the non-communist political forces, especially the Congress, and establish deepened linkages with various state institutions. Furthermore, federal and provincial elections may change the dynamics. The new government after the upcoming election in November will determine the dynamics of Nepal's relation with key geopolitical powers. With no sign of single party or ideologically similar coalitions majority in the election, Nepal's foreign policy by large and far seems to remain unstable. Similarly, China seems to push for BRI 2.0. As the implementation of projects under BRI are stalled with no indication of operationalization, the BRI agreement will expire without any progress in May 2023. Deemed strategic, China may push for another version of BRI agreement. As expected, Tibet will remain the central pillar of foreign engagement. Security issues linked with Tibet will continue to remain major pillar of Chinese engagement. As the US and the West may try to sensitize human rights issues of Tibetan refugees, Nepal will continue to face difficult diplomatic scenario. Nepal will also continue to see heightened competition in infrastructural development sector. China, US, and India will try to increase its investment to dominate the infrastructure network in Nepal. Particular rivalry may arise in hydropower and cross-border connectivity projects and infrastructures. The global powers will try to enhance their engagement through new initiatives like Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPEF, and Global Development Initiative, GDI. Finally, the discourse on the successor of Dalai Lama has already surfaced. With the speculations of appointment of 2 Dalai Lama in near future, one chosen by Dharmasala, backed up by the US and India, and another chosen by Chinese administration, Nepal will face lofty situation to align the side. Thank you. This is my presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arpanji. You provided us a very good background of the engagement of mostly three countries, USA, India, and China in Nepal. Now, our first panel, which is Geopolitical Competition in Nepal. For that, we have 4 panelists with a moderator. I will begin to introduce each panelist. First, we have Dr. Swarnim Wagle. Dr. Swarnim Wagle is a former vice chairman of National Planning Commission of Nepal. He is currently the chair of the Institute for Integrated Development Studies, IIDS, and an eminent member of the World Bank South Asia Championing and Visioning Process. He has served as a senior economist at the World Bank and UNDP in New York, Hanoi, and Colombo. Next, we have Dr. Achyut Wagle. Dr. Achyut Wagle is a registrar at Kathmandu University and a senior fellow with Nepal Policy Institute, NPI. He was an associate dean at Kathmandu University School of Management and has been a long-time contributor to the Kathmandu Post as a political economy expert and weekly columnist for Kantipur publications. Moreover, Dr. Wagle has held key roles, including the advisor to the Prime Minister of Nepal, the Nepal Rashtra Bank, the Chief Commissioner of the Commissions for the Investigation of Abuse of Authority, CIAA. Next, we have Mr. Ajay Bhadra Khanal. Mr. Ajay Bhadra Khanal is the director and editor-in-chief of Ukalo Abhiyan and the present research advisor at Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism, CESIF. He has also held position as a program advisor at the Asia Foundation and editor at the Himalayan Times, research director at CESIF, among others. Mr. Khanal has worked as a journalist in Nepal for more than 20 years, specializing in fields such as politics, development, the environment, and media. Then we have Ms. Apekshya Shah. Ms. Apekshya Shah is an assistant professor in the Department of International Relations and Diplomacy in Tribhuvan University. Her key expertise lie in public policy, foreign policy, and diplomacy. As for her educational background, Ms. Shah holds a bachelor's degree in political science with honors from Delhi University and a postgraduate degree in diplomacy and foreign policy from City University of London. Then we have our moderator for this session, Ambassador Vijay Karna. Ambassador Vijay Karna is the executive chairperson of Center for Social Inclusion and Federalism, CESIF. He has been the ambassador of Nepal to Denmark and was a professor of political science at Tribhuvan University. His keen interests lie in research on geopolitics, foreign policy, and national security. I would like to welcome all the panelists and the moderator on stage, please.
Thank you, Ankita. We have eminent personalities, experts on different issues, and as I told you earlier that what Nepal is facing today is the very pressing issues that all our neighbors and international politics is getting hot. Lot of policies, announcement by different countries, security initiative, development initiatives are coming up at the moment. So how Nepal could respond and match with its own national interest is the prime concern of the Nepalese state and Nepalese people. So in this connection, we have invited prominent people, and there is already introduction. So I would like to start with Dr. Wagle. You have been in World Bank and UNDP, many places, and researcher, no politician. So it's a practitioner, political practitioner, I mean that. So from theoretical to international to coming to the domestic, lot of things you have to face, and you are going to contest the election, and that's why. So my first thing that as we have agreed that the balancing development finance needs with geopolitical imperatives of major power. So my first question to you that how development financing from the major power coincides with the geopolitical imperative? Please.
Thank you, Vijay, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me start with our needs, right? So we are a $40 billion economy. A fairly dated estimate of our infrastructure needs alone was in the range of 10 to 14% of GDP. But if you enhance or enlarge the remit or the definition of infrastructure, beyond the conventional understanding of, roads and airports and telecom infrastructure, irrigation, drinking water, all those kind of things, and you broaden it a little bit, I think our needs are much bigger. A more updated assessment of our needs is probably found in the SDG assessment report that I prepared when I was last with the government of Nepal, 2018-ish. So detailed costing was done on infrastructure needs. So the point to take away here is our needs are immense, right? And at low levels of development, it is largely through capital formation that propels growth. When you reach middle income status, then issues about human capital, research, innovation, all these things matter much more particularly when you need to jump from middle income to high income status. But at low levels of development like us, let me remind our audience that we are the poorest country on the continent, other than war-ravaged Afghanistan still. So needs are immense. Now, so when I sit in government or I chair a think tank or I practice as an international development professional, what I'm looking at is this obvious need, this glaring need for infrastructure financing, so that my country can be on that upward trajectory of economic catch-up. So I'm less concerned about the Machiavellian machinations of what Indian babus are up to, or American diplomats are up to, or how these high-profile Chinese visitors are up to. I leave it to the more sophisticated political analysts. For me, it's really bread and butter, the hard numbers on the table. Now, from that perspective, when I look at China, so as we all know, after 2009, they really expanded the going out strategy that was propagated under Hu Jintao, and of course Xi Jinping came in 2013, formalized at BRI, and that's really been a signature or a flagship Chinese initiative. We all agree, and your presenter also mentioned this, Nepal has largely been aloof from this initiative. We've signed it in 2017, but let me remind that BRI reached its peak in 2016 in terms of annual lending, especially if you take the numbers from the China Development Bank and the Exim Bank. Their cumulative lending between 2009 and 2019 globally has been around $462 billion, which almost matches the cumulative combined lending of all the major international financial institutions, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank. So it's been really, really significant in terms of that global pool on offer, that surplus that China has generated as a trading success. And that pool, that investable surplus, has been on offer to all the takers around the world. Nepal has largely been on the margins of that offer. And from 2016 onwards, that peak lending, annual lending, so I talked about the cumulative lending of over 10 years. Again, note the years. This is immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis. And it sort of paused just before COVID, the 2020. So if you take that interesting 10-year period, it's really significant, right? But by 2019, when it went for a pause, the annual lending was only $4 billion. So Nepal signed in 2017. So the larger point here is, there's so much on offer, yet Nepal did not tap this resource. And I'll just, I just picked this something. 8 Data at the College of William and Mary probably maintains the most comprehensive database on Chinese projects, having analyzed 13,000 projects worth about $1 trillion. They found that it's not just the China Development Bank and the Exim Bank, but there are roughly 300 financing institutions within China that are engaged in some form or the other in these lending practices. But as I mentioned, it's sort of the two dominant policy banks. If you take their figures, BRI is on a pause, and we're expecting a BRI 2, when it's revived. And my anticipation is a lot of the new offer will be not so much bilateral, but multilateralized to de-risk lending and also to address some of the reputational spillovers that China has had to deal with, particularly in our neighborhood, with the Sri Lanka crisis, Pakistan debt distress stories that we're reading these days, and also the Laos story. So on the China front, lot was on offer. We're aloof. In BRI2, we need to be much more proactive and borrow to finance those glaring infrastructural gaps, but on our terms, in a very transparent manner, in a very accountable manner, that sort of defies or and in a manner that undoes, a lot of the traditional Chinese practices. So that's my first point. I'll be brief. With the Indians, it's been playing catch up, really with the Chinese, and oftentimes we find that the policy is dictated by a lot of these paranoid coverage on Chinese meddling in Nepal. I don't buy many of that, but the reality is a lot of it gets a lot of space time, airtime in the Indian media. As far as I'm concerned, our relationship with India is exceptionally important, probably the most important bilateral relationship we have, and it's not earth-shatteringly new that is the case. We have to address their security concerns. We have to address some of the vulnerabilities associated with the rising power, like with the economy. And I see India's interests in Nepal and the broader neighborhood in the same vein as the United States asserted its sphere of influence in the whole, the two American continents, the North America and South America, and it used to be called the Monroe Doctrine. So what I see with the rise of India is we need to be much more sensitive to their wishes of emerging or exercising the South Asian version of the Monroe Doctrine, and we have to be respectful of that. As far as Nepal is concerned, I think we demand mutual respect and recognition, and the tricky thing has been we demand sovereign reciprocity in a relationship that is structurally asymmetric, in terms of population size, economic might, per capita income, etc. But through enlightened leadership, through a vibrant track too, that is what we need to pursue. In terms of our interest, again, filling those glaring development needs, it's thinning the borders, connectivity, of all modes of connectivity, including digital and energy connectivity to foster trade, FDI and GVC, the global value chain sort of participation that the Indians can really truly facilitate, especially in sectors where there's a high intensity of clean energy needs through our hydro, so that we can displace those dirty sources of fuel. In areas where Nepal has some intellectual brand, the geographical indications among the suite of IP tools, not so much the trademark or the integrated circuit, but GIs is very important. And while the window is still active, to leverage some of our LDC-specific preferences in rich markets. And finally, the addressing of regional commons together, from the Himalayas to transport, border migration issues, trafficking issues, even the pandemic. So that's where I see our bilateral relations going. With the United States, just to conclude, the relationship is exceptionally important. We say the US is our third neighbor on the sky. It remains true as long as it remains a global power of some significance. In absolute terms, it will continue to be a dominant power. In relative terms, it will decline. But in absolute terms, per capita income in the US is still $70,000 per capita. China is still at just 11,000, 12,000. So these things matter. Now, on financing hard infrastructure, MCC was an aberration. It was a unique experiment that was done in the aftermath of the 2001, the 9/11 crisis, and two issues that is given much credit to the much maligned former President George Bush are the PEPFAR, the anti-AIDS initiative in Africa, and MCC, which is a paradigm shift in terms of way development financing is done. Unfortunately, it was weaponized, politicized, poisoned the whole discourse. But I hope, through enlightened discussions, we've salvaged it a little bit. But MCC, the amount development finance to the tune of $500 million on grant terms is really an exception. Something like this never happened before. Something like this is unlikely to happen in the future when major donor countries are also resource starved. So that's the context. Where the American interest will lie, against the backdrop of geopolitical rise, that is there, I'm not denying it at all. But from our needs, from Nepal's perspective, we need to lobby much more for private capital inflows through FDI. We've seen some simmering success in the hydro sector, maybe in some in tourism. But Nepal, again, largely untouched by that might of American finance wherewithal. It's a $20 trillion economy. Government budget is just 3-4 trillion. All that private might that the U.S. has, and that could potentially be leveraged in concert with what we can do in the region, especially Indian presence. I think that's a major resource. And the other thing that we need to be lobbying for with the Americans is not to compete along the Chinese terms for these massive loans, but fight for a preferential market access. And that's, I think, is key. U.S. has traditionally been less generous than the Europeans when it comes to offering concessional market access, duty-free, quota-free access. They did give us preferential market access for 66 items, but it was largely symbolic, and we didn't make. But something meaningful in terms of market access would really go a long way, and that's something we can negotiate through a bilateral trade agreement with the United States while safeguarding our policy space on areas where the U.S. is particularly keen, on trade in services, on intellectual property issues, on investment measures, etc. So this is the big picture, and from a development practitioner's point of view, this is what keeps me awake at night, not so much all the conspiracy theories and who visited when and who met whom, what was served and dinner and its stuff. Thank you.
It matters, Dr. Wagle, when who visited, what that matters. Okay, I have another question to you again, because I know that you are running some of the important meetings. So just I would like to know that all these opportunities, as you mentioned, in USA, China, and India, how our domestic actors, especially political leaders in parties and state issues, and why they are not capable to tap all this opportunity during all these years, and how the diplomacy, or how our political leaders could not manage all these opportunity and negotiate with our neighbors as well as international actors. Can you tell me a little? Because from development practitioner, you are going to political practitioner. These are the things you need to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, no, that's a very valid question, of course. I think the answer is self-evident, right? It depends on how prepared our political leadership and the top bureaucratic layer is in terms of being aware of what's going on around us, preparing from a Nepali perspective on what is needed, making that case very credibly, confidently on international forums, or even in bilateral negotiating settings. We can see that our folks don't really have that. And once in a while, we see a bright civil servant, maybe a smart foreign secretary, or a very smart, credible finance secretary, or even some ministers who can do that. But we can't run statecraft of a country of Nepal's size based on accidental successes of a few individuals. It has to be systemic. The whole institutional capabilities have to be augmented in a substantial degree. So there we've lagged, definitely, and therefore it is my hope that a new crop of political aspirants, a new generation of politicians have that confidence, that international experience, that knowledge, not only to make a case for Nepal, but also inspire others who are following them to assert that. And we have to be realistic, of course, about Nepal's strengths and weaknesses, and where I believe we stand a chance. We still command immense goodwill in the international arena, so that exercise of soft power to convert all that goodwill into hard dollars needs that tact, that diplomatic wherewithal, the whole institutionalized effort, particularly on the, we can't wait for the entire country to be cleaned up. We can't wait for the entire system to be upgraded. So this is where some of those low-hanging fruits, some demonstration effects might be brought to bear. And I am quite confident that we can engage at that level with China, India, and also the United States. Also sort of deploying some of the new tools and instruments that are in our favor. Social media, newspapers, Track 2, think tanks like yourselves, is very much a powerful part of that powerful suite, that arsenal that we must deploy in to derive results in Nepal's favor and interest.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. I'm coming to another Wagle. Dr. Achyut Wagle is the registrar You know, one thing very similar to me and Dr. Wagle, I was teaching at the university and went to journalism and back to again teaching. And he was in journalism and back to the academia. So it's a,
I also tried some politics. But
yeah. So, Dr. Achyut Wagle, your topics, as you yourself suggested, that geo-economic interest in trade and infrastructure. I have one very important thing that when we are talking about, as Dr. Swarnim said, that very goodwill all over the world. 4 years of my diplomatic assignment in Europe, wherever I go, I found the European leaders, diplomats, all very positive towards Nepal. But I myself feel that we fail to tap all this opportunity and goodwill. Soft issues, like earlier we have a carpet in the European market, now we have a little bit with the America, and but now it's all decreasing carpet, garments, and many trade issues. So my first thing I would like to just to ask you how economic and infrastructure diplomacy has been forwarded by major powers to expand their strategic interests.
Thank you, Ambassador Karna. Thank you for the opportunity. First, my disclaimer: I had committed to Ambassador Karna to speak in this program before I got this official kind of tag of a registrar. So, in Nepal, it is a familiar kind of statement to make. These are my independent views of where I actually work. So that's one. Thank you for the question. I am going into very simple statistics. One is related to trade. Today I was turning some numbers. They are very simple numbers. In the last fiscal year, we could export only about 800 million rupees worth of goods to China, and we imported about 265 billion worth of goods. So if you try to make a ratio, I think it is overwhelming. Like we are exporting only 1 rupee equivalent when we are importing about 330 rupees equivalent of the goods from China. Second, if you compare in the same way, it is 1:10 with India. So I don't want to get into that, but as you rightly asked, Ambassador Karna, no economic aid, even the trade, comes without the string attached, with the interest attached on kind of influence on the country like Nepal when we sit between two very large economies. If you go back in 1960s, the size of Nepali economy and size of Indian economy and size of Chinese economy was almost similar. It is about Chinese economy was only 57 times larger than the Nepalese economy at that time. But today, the Chinese economy is about 470 times larger than the Nepali economy. Indian economy is 120 times larger than the Nepali economy. That is actually the might, their might, which they are exerting in different ways. One very evident thing is that we have talked a lot about the number of high-level visits from China, but Nepal's diplomatic capability was not even able to unlock the doors of our physical transit points to bring in the goods that was already paid, and the truckloads of those goods were stranded on the other side of the border. So if it is a diplomacy, there has to be some movement, some positive movements in solving. If it is not only related to the making influence, putting influence, it should be in solving the problems in the mutual benefit. I see this is not even a mutual benefit. It is about the goods coming to this side of the border, which Nepali traders have already paid for. So this is an indication how. I'm not only talking about how China behaves with Nepal. How much have we
made ourselves capable of handling our own diplomacy. Same applies with India. We often still talk about the three key blockades in this or that pretext. When I see Dr. Wagle mention about BRI2, today I was reading about the BRI3. From Chinese point of view itself, it is a very big experimentation. When it started, it was very crude. And later it came in the shape of a very sophisticated, good fiscal governance kind of proposition. They wanted to disburse the loan in quite comparable fashion of the World Bank and other multilateral agencies with making it more liberal kind of thing. So, but they also seem to be confused what they need to do. Another thing is, if you look at the economic relations between China and India, it is completely different than what kind of narratives they are trying to make vis-a-vis Nepal. If you go to Delhi, their kind of perception is it is as if Chinese military is in the streets of Kathmandu, particularly during the time of this blockade and all. It was the perception. That is how you are portrayed. That is how the so-called lieutenants Delhi talk to you. If you go to Beijing, you are completely, as always, historically under the Indian influence, which is not true. Look at the size of the India and China trade. It is crossing. It crossed well $100 billion. Okay, India has got trade deficit, but they are important. Even in terms of the BRI loan, China is one of the biggest borrower from China, BRI Bank of China. So China Development Bank, that is the name they have changed very recently. So they are not trying to sort of see Nepal's imperatives being in between these two powerful countries, and we are not able to create our own independent narratives of it. When talking about two specific things on trade, we have been perhaps very much outward looking. When I said this, I mean we are very much concerned how China behaves, how India behaves. When it comes to trade, we must have something to sell. If we are not producing anything, Ambassador Karna mentioned about carpets, garments. We talk about pashmina. I think there is a very little value addition in those kind of exports, even the palm oil. If you import all the raw materials, unfinished goods, and try to re-export them with a very little value addition, our economy is not immensely going to benefit. So in trade, we probably look into that. In infrastructure, there is no hiding. I was reading Leo Rose in the morning. So it has been 50 years. That book has been published by Leo Rose, but we are in the same kind of narratives. The infrastructure, China is focusing on even now through BRI. BRI is a new phenomena, but if you look at the priorities, we can see the two kind of different approaches. India has always been very keen to defend its territories even while developing infrastructure in Nepal. If you remember, I found a video clip by a BBC journalist when Kodari highway was being constructed. The narrative was the Chinese tanks should roll down through this highway to Indian border. So India was very apprehensive about it. And if you see the kind of road design by India, it may be Siddharth Highway, it may be Tribhuvan Highway, it may be even BP Highway, the snaky, difficult roads with the difficult twists and turns, is, I don't know, it's actually to prevent the very fast Chinese artillery movements, tank movements to that. That is the apprehension. So India has been in a very much defensive side. These days we are talking about the railway lines, be that the Raswagari, Kathmandu, or anything. China seems to be in the mood to penetrate to the South Asian market, trans-Himalayan market. So even if you look at the narratives created by the trans-Himalayan multi-connectivity framework or global development initiative framework, it is in quite contrast to what Indians are doing. The Chinese kind of interest seems to be in penetrating, not being defensive on this game. When we talk about the key stakeholders in our diplomacy, it is no, Gilalji presented about China, India, and United States. Of course, they are very important, but we must not forget the emerging kind of equation in the form of the Quad, emerging equation in Europe. Our development partners in Europe, they are very, very valuable. So we need to see our things through those kind of perspective. Coming back to the infrastructure, we have got the road, we have talked about the road infrastructure, whether you know it or not. Before construction of Kodari Highway, the first proposition of China was to construct the highway from Raswagari to Kathmandu. It was later changed and the Kodari Highway came first, and still the priority is Raswagari because there are certain security filters, geographic security filters are available through that route for the Chinese to they think have got the very, very good security cushion they can have operating through that. Another very important infrastructure is energy infrastructure. We are talking a lot about our potential of exporting electricity. Particularly hydroelectricity. That is fantastic. Even if we have got the source supply back home, we need to export some items. That can be one of the items. Electricity could be one of the items. But when you look at very realistically, the per capita consumption of electricity in Nepal is barely 300 kilowatt hour in a year. If you look at even the developing country average, it is about 1,000 to 1,200 kilowatt hours. If you need to increase that consumption, electricity consumption to that level, you need to develop at least another 4,000 megawatts of electricity just for the household consumption. I'm not talking about the industrialization. I'm not talking about the electricity powered transport infrastructure. So there is another big caveat on exporting that. I want to link it with the trade. If we want to offset our huge trade deficit by exporting electricity, we must also remember something called Dutch disease that the Dutch people had in early 70s when they found the huge storage, the underground storage of petroleum. They started to export it, earn a lot of green dollars, but the domestic industry, the employment generation was killed. If you think of earning dollar by exporting electricity without using it for the industrialization, without using it for the commercial purposes, of course, very recent guidelines from the Central Electricity Authority has got its certain conditions. The third party financing that India does not have power purchase agreement is going to be difficult. We are reading those news. Are you trying to stop me? So should I stop here? So this is key. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. You have a very pertinent issues, the trade opportunities in different parts of the world, not only 3 countries, but other European and other countries. There are a lot of emerging economies also. Coming to our another panelist, Mr. Ajay Bhadra Khanal, journalist and academic. So Ajay ji, one very important thing which when we were at CESIF, we discussed many things about this. So Nepal's internal political division and stress on bilateral relations in geopolitics. What we found that since some of the years, not some of the years, from a lot of years it is that the political parties are divided along the line with the countries. but we found that some of the parties aligned with India, America, some of the parties with China, and what we found that some of the countries used as an instrument for their bilateral reach to the countries. So how you find that internal division? Then we see that the Nepal's national interest is divided, and it's not, the cohesive, comprehensively accepted by all political forces. That we have, these are the national interests. So our national interest, how to match with all these strain coming from our neighbors as well from the international actors.
Thank you. So we've been talking about Nepal's economic development interests, Nepal's national interests. But the point I would like to make here today is that in order to pursue our interests, we must also take into account the political economic dimensions of geopolitics, the domestic, the internal dynamics that's taking place within Nepal. So if we look at the political economic dimensions in Nepal, the impact of geopolitical competition at the global and regional level, we see several trends that are happening. The first impact I would like to mention is, of course, the impact of geopolitics on our ideological and political landscape. So this has happened since the 1950s with the influence of communism, with the influence of Russian ideology, with the influence of Chinese Maoist ideology. So Nepal has traditionally been divided into 3 or 4 distinct ideologies. One is the leftist ideology of Marxism, of Russian influence, of Chinese influence, even North Korean influence, and recently, Peruvian and Venezuelan influence as well. So that kind of ideological landscape, the leftist landscape is there. Another landscape is that of socialism and democratic ideals represented by Nepali Congress. The third is traditionally we have the nationalist ideology espoused by the monarchy as well as by a large chunk of the populace. And the fourth kind of ideological landscape is that of the marginalized people who've been fighting for their rights. So they have a different kind of discourse. So these pre-existing ideological landscape, political landscapes were partly or to a great extent even caused by this international ideological landscape of the Cold War period. And that still influences how we think about foreign policy and how we pursue our national interests. So that is, I think, one of the most important factors. But at the same time, there are also other significant impact of geopolitics on Nepal. For example, on foreign policy itself, we see that our diplomacy has become more or less ineffective because I think, my point of view is that traditionally Nepal has thought of foreign policy in terms of 4 distinct spheres. On the one hand, we have military, diplomacy, and then we have bilateral diplomacy, and we think in terms of regional diplomacy, and we think in terms of international diplomacy. And traditionally, all these 4 spheres were isolated with each other. But what has happened in recent years is that all these 4 different spheres have cross-cut because of geopolitical influence. So Nepal's relations with India is no longer bilateral. It also involves China. It also involves US. And the same thing has happened with Nepal's relations with China. Nepal's relations with China involves India's interest in Nepal, the US interest in Nepal, and also Nepal's international positions that it takes, for example, in the UN. It's been cross-cut by bilateral interests. For example, Nepal has taken contradictory positions in the international area because of geopolitical impact. On the one hand, Nepal sided with China on Hong Kong issue, and then we also sided with Ukraine. These were contradictory policies that Nepal adopted. And we see that Nepal's diplomacy has become ineffective because it's no longer able to manage these cross-cutting elements. So that's one. And another dimension is that Nepal frequently talks of independent foreign policy in terms of quote or asamlagna niti as well, non-aligned policies. And traditionally, these policies have been in favor of China more than in favor of Nepal itself. When Nepal adopts a non-aligned policy, it has been unable to take advantage of, for example, the goodwill of Western democracies or India and the US. So these are different elements that are taking place. Another impact, I would just like to briefly mention 2 or 3 other impacts that it has is, of course, on the impact of geopolitics is also on Nepal's political parties. They are divided, but their major interest is on acquisition of power. So in order to acquire power and financial resources, they have used foreign policies and relations with other countries, including India, China, and the US. So political parties pursue their own foreign policy in order to promote their own power interests or financial interests, in order to not just accumulate power, but also to satisfy their party workers. So these are, different kinds of political economic dimensions of geopolitics. Another major impact that I see and that we must discuss is the impact that it has on our democratic system as well as on our governance system. For example, we've seen since 2015, since promulgation of our constitution, several governments have changed. And all these changes have been because of the influence of foreign countries. So what we are seeing currently is a coalition government, a part of which is close to the US and India, and a part of which is close to China. So does that mean that in the future we must have a coalition government that satisfies all the foreign powers? So that seems to be the only stable strategy, given the influence of geopolitics in Nepal. So we have to negotiate through all these domestic dimensions of geopolitics in order to achieve the benefits of globalization, the benefits of BRI or MCC.
Thank you, Ajay. Again, I will come to you. We have Apekshya Shah. She's a professor at Tiruma University, my colleague at the university, and she is doing very good job as a researcher, as a teacher. So Apekshya, coming to you, I have one very important thing, that there are a lot of regional and sub-regional things developed since 2 decades in this region. And we have been in BRI, we have been accepting the other, we are IPS internationally. And some of the research, regional, sub-regional organizations, since SARC is not functional at the moment, so BBIN, BMSTEC, there are a lot of institutions coming up. And we are member of both BBIN and BMSTEC. How Nepal can be benefited and how Nepal is playing its role in all these sub-regional entities. Can you explain a little bit?
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. It's such an honor to be able to speak among such distinguished panelists. I hope I can give my 2 pennies on what I feel about the issue. Right, so regional initiative of BBIN and BIMSTEC are viable, and I believe it is in our favor, not only ours, but I think of all actors involved, and could truly contribute towards a more integrated region for the benefit of all. But before I explore these initiatives, I just want to quickly highlight the 2 trends that we've already spoken about, but just to set the context, right? So the first is that the return of geopolitics has once again overwhelmed us with various policies. So we have BRI, now again GDI and GSI, or IPS, Look East, or Neighborhood First. So policies that are basically aimed at managing changing geopolitical complexities in a rising Asian system and creating strategic space for influence. So management of bigger powers becomes a concern for countries like Nepal. So that is one. The second, of course, is the idea of strategic interactions, or as we have I think we're more familiar with strategic partnerships. Now, this has been a very important feature post-Cold War diplomacy. India, China, Russia, US all have strategic relations with one another. Each country basically has sought a pragmatic diplomatic format to pursue mutual interests. Now, the other idea of strategic partnership is that it's not an alliance. They don't require states to cooperate militarily or use force to defend allies, and are flexible, ongoing, and allows a state to pursue bilateral, regional, and global policies without compromising freedom of action. So it should be understood as maintaining a pragmatic assessment of bilateral relations and having decisional autonomy. And we can also rephrase it as a newer version of non-alignment, where countries seek alignment, but only on issue-by-issue basis. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this forward is because while bigger countries seem to be engaging in this kind of strategies, even Nepal and other smaller powers seem to be following certain these kind of tendencies as well, which is not bad. Strategic ties, especially given the rising great power competition, could be very beneficial, but it has to be handled very carefully, and your interaction with other actors needs to be assessed on issue-by-issue basis if we're going for strategic partnerships, right? So that is what I think should be, I wanted to emphasize, because one of the biggest drawback of something like strategic partnerships right now that we observe is that misinterpretation is very likely, because at any given point, we do not know what strategic partnership actually entails. So communications is key, and misinterpreting decisions or the actions could lead to disastrous impact. Now, the reason why I started with this is because I just wanted to build a case how, in this background, BBIN and BIMSTEC, the regional initiatives, seem to be less controversial. It could be just my opinion, and I could be completely wrong, but it feels less controversial because it is a larger part of these regional initiatives that we have been endorsing since 1980s. Like you rightly mentioned, after the stall in the SARC process, these initiatives have been highlighted even further. In no way do these initiatives replace SARC, but I think it's a very logical for regional actors to move ahead with arrangements that work, right? So even with BBIN, it looks more or less like BIN right now, because which is fine, because Bhutan is okay with Nepal, India, and Bangladesh to move ahead, and this is what the point I want to make, is that let's go ahead with whatever works. Success through BBIN and BIMSTEC could make other regional actors see the benefit of connectivity and shared destiny for achieved growth, which we have always been, which we have, which we recognize from a very long time. If we look at the region of South Asia, it is the fastest growing sub-region. And I think it's a little old estimates, but I think according to UN, back in 2014, they had calculated that almost 70% of the trade potential was not exploited. And even simplest trade liberalization and facilitation improvement in South Asia could lead to great GDP benefits for the countries involved. So having said that, should I just, yeah, so right. So having said that, okay, what do we need to do to make BBIN and BIMSTEC let's say, successful, right? So it is about regional integration, which could mean multiple things. It could mean infrastructure connectivity. It could mean free trade agreements. It could mean non-tariff measures. It could mean opening up sectors. It could mean, coming up with mutual recognition of standards, qualification, and regulations, or even energy grid, right? Now, narrowing it down even further. Now, if we're particularly talking about BBIN and BIMSTEC, it is more to do with infrastructure and energy. There are other things on the table as well, but let's say those are the main agendas. Now, to be able to successfully manage these initiatives, so the first thing is, of course, endorsement at the highest level, which seems to be lacking. I think we had a discussion, like BIMSTEC recently has an office, BBIN is being implemented through these various other agencies. So endorsement by the highest level is, of course, going to be key. After that, however, there's going to be two very important factors. One is going to be, first, of course, we need to have clarity on which projects are we going to move ahead in short term. So that means what is our immediate concerns and what is our long-term concerns. After that, there will be two phases of negotiations that will need to be prioritized. So one would be intra-country negotiations, right? So between Nepal, India, and Bangladesh, how do we manage those negotiations? There are already working modalities present. It has been going on for 7 years now. So we need to identify domestic actors and give them the authority, the diplomatic momentum has to be continued, and so on and so forth, right? So the international negotiations will obviously be a very large part of it. However, what seems to be lacking is not only the intra-country negotiations, but the fact that the inter-country negotiations are also equally important. We will need regulatory policies endorsed by our domestic actors. We need to have stakeholder management in our country, right? So every, like, let's suppose if we do differentiate different sectors, so let's say infrastructure, it will have its own stakeholders, right? It could be because of environment. If we talk about, let's say, BBIN, right, which is a freedom movement of a vehicle, then we will have the Truckers Association that we'll have to deal with. So every sector will have, so it is about domestic stakeholder management as well as implementing the policies required as we move along. Also, so how can we, okay, right, so I just want to point out one more, which is very important, which I think Swarnim sir has already touched upon and other speakers also have touched upon, is resources required for infrastructure. So there are two parts to it. One is that having infrastructure only in our border towns, it's not going to be enough, right? So there has to be complementary infrastructures in the neighboring border towns also. Now, previously it was a challenge, but with the growth of India and Bangladesh, I think these two countries are dedicated and have the capacity to fund infrastructure projects in the bordering areas. In the case of Nepal, however, what kind of financial modalities are we going to take up for our infrastructure seems to be a little of a concern. And so there are a lot of multilateral agencies who are already supporting this initiative. So we have ADB, World Bank. So I'm hoping that the financing modalities coming or financial resources coming from these multilateral institutions will not be as controversial, but only time can tell. But bilateral financial, arrangements seem to be a little, for instance, right, so hydropower, so the Chinese investment in hydropower has been vetoed by India. It's not only the Chinese investment, but they have also raised concerns about Chinese contractors. So how do we find ways around these issues will be pertinent? So Nepal will have to be given alternatives at I think, if this is supposed to go on. The way around it, and I'll just keep it very short now. So just moving forward, one possibility is, of course, your internal negotiations, your external negotiations, and so on and so forth. But there is a possibility of Nepal and Bangladesh working together. Bangladesh's diplomatic standing has incredibly increased in recent years. Now again, what we need to be careful is India should not view this as a, ganging up against Delhi, which is a frequent sentiment. So even that needs to be considered, and how we can bypass this is by being, and I think I was glad that Swarnim sir brought this point, is being considerate of their national interest, because we have to keep in mind the Siliguri corridor, which is the main pathway for BBIN, and for BIMSTEC it is more northeastern states of Manipur and so on. It's a very sensitive region for India. So I think if Nepal and Bangladesh work together and keep the security concerns of India into question, I think it should not be a problem. However, Delhi being a more bigger actor, right, and if it hopes to play a more meaningful role in establishing and maintaining a favorable regional order in South Asia, the extent to which it will provide alternatives to Nepal and Bangladesh is going to be quite crucial. So I think all the countries need to move beyond positions and look into interests and how we can resolve the issues. And agreeable points and alternatives are going to be key in, I think, moving forward, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Apekshya. There are a lot of issues even in the BBI and BMSTEC. The trade among all the SAARC countries and BMSTEC and BBIN, the less they are doing trade with other European, Americans, Chinese, but less trade among themselves. There are a lot of things to do in that. I will come to you. So, Dr. Wagle, अब म अलिकति नेपालीमा गर्छु. हाम्रो साथीहरू ले दुईजना इन्टरनेसनल हुनुहुन्छ, अरू पनि हुनुहुन्छ भने हेल्प गरिदिनुस् ल. म तपाईलाई एउटा अर्को कुरो के भएर भने हाम्रो यो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर कम्पिटिसन पहिले पनि 60s मा पनि देखियो. इभन स्पेस हाइवेमा कम्पिटिसन देखिएको थियो हैन. त्यो बेलामा पनि चाहिँ इन्डियन अमेरिकनहरूले ब्रिटिस सबैले विथड्र गरेपछि चाहिँ हामी सर्वे गर्छु पनि अफर गरेको थियो. तर पछि चाहिँ फेरि रसियन र इन्डियन र ब्रिटिस मिलेर त्यो रोड बनाए. अलमोस्ट 70% अफ द पार्ट इज मेड बाई इन्डिया. यो कम्पिटिसन अहिले म के देखिरहेको छु भने एकातिर हाम्रो जियोपोलिटिक्स कम्पिटिसन बढिरहेको बेलामा इन्फ्लुएन्स वर्ल्ड वाइड क्रिएट गर्ने कुरोमा बढिरहेको साथै अपर्च्युनिटी पनि देखिरहेको छ. दे अफर समथिङ टु टेक समथिङ or to influence things they are offering us. So अब यो हेर्दाखेरि हामी कसरी त्यसलाई रिस्पोन्ड गर्न सक्छौँ जसरी हाम्रो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर निड डाक्टर स्वर्णिमले भन्नुभयो कि हामीले प्राइभेट फन्डिङहरूमा पनि हेर्नुपर्छ किनभने वर्ल्ड वाइड फन्डिङ अहिले मल्टिलेटरल एजेन्सिजहरूको पनि फन्डिङको रिसोर्स कम छ चाइनाको पनि के देखियो भने कुनै बेला 467 बिलियन गरेको अहिले 4 बिलियनमा आएर भएको सो द लट अफ स्ट्रेन अन इकोनोमी के अरे भने यो कोभिडले गर्दाखेरि र अरू पेन्डेमिकले गर्दाखेरि हामी कसरी यो कम्पिटिसनमा हाम्रो नेसनल निडलाई प्रायोरिटाइज गरेर कसरी चाइनासँग इन्डियासँग अमेरिकासँग अरू युरोपियन पार्टनरहरू छन् हाम्रो डेभलपमेन्ट पार्टनरहरू छन् तिनीहरूसँग कसरी हाम्रो प्रायोरिटी सेक्टरमा ल्याउँछ
You want me to speak in Nepali? That's fine. Let me be very practical here. Number one, I think we all of us know what to do, what needs to be done. Only thing missing is how are we going to do it? That is the question, which is very seldom answered. We have never discussed about the hows. We talked about. I also mentioned about looking inward, creating. We have been talking about creating a common national foreign policy. There are three basics, whether we can do it or not. Can we make it inclusive foreign policy, not divided into ideological and geo-ethnic lines?
Dr. Wagle, we have a foreign policy in 2018.
Yes.
And we have a foreign aid policy in 2014.
14, yes.
We
I'm
have a national security policy also revised.
We also have a trade policy in 2009. Yes, we have the policies, but I don't want to get into the review kind of thing of those policies because I want to repeat, those policies only talk about what, don't talk about how. I'll give you an example. We made a FDI policy in 2017. But if you look at the FDI, the saga of FDI has not been very encouraging. Last fiscal year, we attracted 16 billion equivalent of foreign direct investment. We cannot do anything with that when you think of developing a nation. So attracting foreign policy, having private funds into it, we need to work very hard. The country needs to be in the international radar of credit rating, very credible credit rating. Back home, if you talk about creating a socialist state running by the communists, and at the same time attracting a foreign policy, foreign direct investment or official development assistance is not going to happen. You may counter question me, that happened in China, yes. But look at the amount of economic democratization of the Chinese policies. The guarantee, the state guarantee they have been given. Forget about the kind of political regime they are adopting. The surety of return on investment, the repatriation policy, it is hugely liberalized. The cost of labor, the infrastructure network is very, very important. That is one. Second, we must stop thinking about developing this country by the help of the foreign aid. That era has gone. So where we are landing is we must land on trade. When you talk about trade, you must have something to trade. Nepal's current day problem, I am repeating it, is we don't have a single commodity to produce and sell in economic scale. You cannot offset. Many of you have heard this my statement. You cannot offset billions dollar worth of trade deficit by exporting handmade papers, handicrafts, wooden crafts. There is something called economies of scale. We must think about it. It may be a single product. It may be two products. So that is, if we don't produce anything, or any kind of policies, whenever it comes, we start to reviewing the policies, rewriting them, instead of focusing on what we can produce. That's first. Second, regarding infrastructure, we have invested very generously some of the infrastructure. Like our two very expensive airports are going to lie idle for years. Pokhara Airport and Bhairava Airport. There is geopolitical issue. Our air route is in trouble. That is, India may not be cooperating, but where have we tried to negotiate the air route to evade that 300 kilometers, 300 nautical miles of loop that the airplanes have to come through? So that is on the air kind of transport. Yes, we have seen when China came with the proposal, at least that was popularized by some political factions here, Rasuagari, Pokhara, Lumbini, whichever railway network. India came with the Raxol-Kathmandu network. That is in a way competition. But we have not been able to say, what will we be sending back through those rails? Okay, rail comes from Beijing to Kathmandu. And what does it take back? Do we have anything produced to fill in the rail cargo? So what is our priority? Is our priority railway from Raxol to Kathmandu or Rasuagadi to Kathmandu? Or both? If both, why? Where is our national narrative? Where is our national narrative? That is on the railway network. Roads, I don't want to debate. We are 150 years behind on, we are still talking about the dozer development and the roads. So I don't want to get into. The two new emerging infrastructure we must talk about is the information technology. Information technology has surpassed all the boundaries. It has redefined our nationalism. It has redefined our national interest. So this is the time, can we explore new avenues of cooperation with our development partners, be that neighbors and all. I've already mentioned about the possibility of electricity. I don't want to get into that. It also has got a lot of strategic issues. What is the strategic issues is our priority. Nepal's priority perhaps is electricity. India's priority is perhaps the water, the down riparian benefits of the recharge of water. When I say I can keep on talking about all these things, but it is high time we start to talk about production, anything if we want to survive, because sovereignty without at least acceptable degree of economic independence has no meaning. You may talk about we are a sovereign country, but we have seen that during blockade. We have seen that during blockade. We have seen how China is causing a virtual blockade, and no nice word is going to compensate the difficulties people face due to this kind of blockades. Because we could not say, if you're not sending this many trucks of goods, we'll also stop this many goods so that your people in trouble. We don't have that capability. So, as an student of economics, we must produce something. Otherwise, we don't have a future. We don't have a future.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle. Ajay ji, यो जुन किसिमको जियोपोलिटिकल कम्पिटिसन देखिन्छ, कुनै पार्टी कुनै देशको नेता भने एउटा पार्टीलाई भेट्ने, पार्टी मिलाउने कुरा गर्ने, चुनावमा फ्रन्ट बनाउने, अर्को देशको आयो भने अर्कोहरूलाई भेट्ने, यो अनि त्यसपछि यो जुन कुराहरू भइरहेको हुन्छ, यो र त्यो चाहिँ रिफ्लेक्सन देखिन्छ पार्लियामेन्टमा, स्ट्रिटमा, एमसीसीको बेलामा देखियो, एसपीपीको बेलामा पनि देखियो, विदाउट गोइङ टु द मेरिट अफ द एनी प्रोजेक्ट्स और प्रोजेक्ट्स र त्यो इनिसिएटिभहरूको बारेमा सोच्दै नसोचिकन जुन किसिमको हामी कहाँ यो क्रिएट हुन्छ र त्यसरी चाहिँ फरेन पावरहरू, पोलिटिकल पार्टी, पोलिटिकल लिडरहरूलाई जुन किसिमले इन्फ्लुएन्स गरेर नेसनल पोलिसीमा चेन्जिङ जुन देखिराखेको हुन्छ, कतिपय बेलामा भर्खरै भनौँ न अहिले अस्ति प्रेसिडेन्ट विद्यादेवी भण्डारीले चाइनाको सेक्युरिटी, नेसनल सेक्युरिटी, ग्लोबल सेक्युरिटी इनिसिएटिभमा भाग लिनु। भर्खर 3 हप्ता अगाडि 4 हप्ता अगाडि हामीले अमेरिकाको जुनमा हामी आफैले एप्लाई गरेका थियौँ एसपिपीमा हामी लिँदैनौँ भनेर हाम्रो गभर्मेन्टले डिसिजन गर्यो एउटा सेक्युरिटी इनिसिएटिभ भन्यो इन्डो पेसिफिकको पार्ट द्याट इज येट टु बी डिस्कस्ड वाट इट इज एसपिपी एक्चुअली वेदर वी निड अर नट इट वाज नट डिस्कस्ड इन पार्लियामेन्ट द्याट इज वाट माई कन्सर्न इज द्याट त्यो कहिले डिस्कसन भएन संसदमा यो लिनु हुँदैन किन लिनु हुँदैन यो सेक्युरिटी हो यो एलायन्स हो मिलिट्री एलायन्स हो तर यो त्यसको मेरिट के हो एक्चुअलमा त्यो हाम्रो पार्लियामेन्टले पनि डिस्कस गर्न पार्टीहरूले पनि डिस्कसन गर्न अब अहिले नयाँ जुन अप्रिल 2021मा 4वटा चाइनिज प्रेसिडेन्ट सीले इनिसिएटिभहरू बिआरआई त पहिलेदेखि हो ग्लोबल हेल्थ इनिसिएटिभ ग्लोबल सेक्युरिटी इनिसिएटिभ र ग्लोबल डेभलपमेन्ट इनिसिएटिभ त यो यसरी भाग लिँदाखेरि जुन आयो पत्रिकाहरूमा के आयो न्युजमा भने प्रधानमन्त्री र परराष्ट्र मन्त्रीले भन्दा नभाग लिनुहोस् भन्दा भन्दै भाग भनेर आयो अब यो जुन इन्टरनल डिभिजन छ प्रेसिडेन्ट आफ्नोतिर फरेन पोलिसी चलाउने प्राइम मिनिस्टर र फरेन मिनिस्टर अर्को तरिकाले चलाउने पार्लियामेन्ट अर्को तरिकाले चलाउने पार्टीहरूले अर्को तरिकाले चलाउने यो जुन देखियो अहिले देखिराखेको छ केही वर्षदेखि चाहिँ यसले हाम्रो नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्ट र हाम्रो फरेन पोलिसी लाई नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्टमा युज गर्नलाई कतिको अप्ठ्यारो र कसरी यसलाई सल्भ गर्नु प्लिज
हजुर थ्याङ्क यू यो चाहिँ एकदम रेलेभेन्ट प्रश्न हो र अघि पनि मैले भने नेपालमा फरेन पोलिसी एउटा आइडियोलोजिकल र आइडेन्टिटीको पनि एउटा रोल एकदम ठुलो रोल छ तर त्यो सँगसँगै त्यसमा पोलिटिकल इकोनोमी इन्ट्रेस्ट्सहरू पनि छ जस्तै विशेष गरिकन विदेशीहरूको जुन लेभरेज छ इभन इलेक्टोरल रिजल्ट्समा इलेक्सन क्याम्पेनिङमा र उनीहरूले जुन प्रोभाइड गर्ने मैले अघि पनि भने कार्यकर्ताहरूलाई सपोर्ट गर्न चाहिने जुन रिसोर्सेसहरू प्रोभाइड गर्ने क्षमताले गर्दाखेरि जुन लेभरेजहरू छ विशेष गरिकन चाइना इन्डिया र युएसको जुन लेभरेज छ त्यो लेभरेज हाम्रो पोलिटिसियन्सहरूको लागि एकदमै अट्र्याक्टिभ छ एउटा कारण भयो आइडियोलोजिकल र आइडेन्टिटीको कारणले गर्दाखेरि त्यो एउटा जुन बायस छ चाइनाप्रतिको बायस अथवा इन्डिया अमेरिकाप्रतिको जुन बायस छ त्यो भन्दा माथि उठेर कसरी गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने विषयमा मलाई लाग्छ अझ व्यापक छलफल बाँकी नै छ विजयजीले भन्नुभयो नेपालमा परराष्ट्र नीतिमा एउटा पार्टीले एक खालको परराष्ट्र नीति अडप्ट गरिराखेका हुन्छ तर राज्यकै निकायहरूको बिचमा पनि विभिन्न खालका परराष्ट्र नीतिहरू देखा परिराखेका हुन्छन् राष्ट्रपति कार्यालयको एउटा खालको परराष्ट्र नीति अवलम्बन गरिराखेको हो कि जस्तो क्रियाकलापहरूबाट देखिन्छ त्यस गर्दा प्रधानमन्त्रीको कार्यालयको अर्को हुन्छ अनि परराष्ट्र मन्त्रालयको अर्कै खालको छ अर्थ मन्त्रालयको अर्कै खालको छ र यिनीहरूको संस्थाहरूको बिचमा कतिको कोअर्डिनेसन छ यो राष्ट्रपतिकै जुन जिएसआईमा भाग लिनुभयो त्यसले पनि देखाउँछ कि त्यहाँभित्रको कम्युनिकेसन्समा एउटा ठुलो ग्याप छ र मिसअन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ क्रिएट हुने सम्भावना पनि प्रबल छ त्यो कारणले गर्दाखेरि राष्ट्रपतिले जिएसआईमा भाग लिँदाखेरि उदाहरणको लागि चीनले जहिले पनि यो विशेष गरिकन देउबाको सरकार आएपछि गठबन्धन सरकार आएपछि सरकार अलिकता चिसिएको हो कि जस्तो चीनले फिल गर्ने अनि त्यस बापत चाहिँ जहिले पनि राष्ट्रपतिको संस्थालाई प्रयोग गरेर अझै पनि नेपाल हाम्रो पक्षमा छ भनेर आफैले देखाउनलाई चीनले चीनभित्रै जुन एउटा डोमेस्टिक कन्जम्सनको लागि एउटा फेस भ्याल्युमा राष्ट्रपतिको संस्थालाई नेपालकोले प्रयोग गरिराखेको अवस्था छ र मलाई लाग्छ यो विषयमा छलफल जरुरी छ यसको कुनै एउटा सल्युसन छैन यसको सल्युसनको लागि उदाहरणको लागि जस्तै कङ्क्रिट पोलिसिजहरू पनि ल्याउन सकिन्छ विदेशबाट चुनावको लागि पैसा ल्याउन नमिल्नेदेखि लिएर जस्तै अमेरिकाहरूमा विभिन्न म्याग्निट्स्की एक्टहरू जस्ता खालका पोलिसिजहरू छन् यस्ता खालका पोलिसिजहरूदेखि लिएर अघि अचुजीले पनि भन्नुभयो यो पोलिसिजहरू त छन् हामी कहाँ तिनीहरूले केही हदसम्म के हुनुपर्छ भन्ने एउटा आइडियलिस्टिक हिसाबको कुराकानी गरिराखेका हुन्छन् तर तिनीहरूको इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनमा जहाँ आउँछ यो चाहिँ पोलिटिकल इन नेचर छ र पोलिटिकल इन्ट्रेस्ट फाइनेन्सियल इन्ट्रेस्ट पावरको इन्ट्रेस्टहरूलाई कसरी म्यानेज गर्ने त्यो लेभलको पोलिसिजहरू हामीलाई चाहिन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ र यसमा थप छलफल हुनु जरुरी छ किन भन्दाखेरि हाम्रो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर पोलिसीमै पनि फरेन जियोपोलिटिक्सको इम्प्याक्ट परिराखेको छ नेपालको नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्ट इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेभलपमेन्टमा कस्तो हुने फर इक्जाम्पल हाइड्रो पावर डेभलपमेन्टमा के हुनुपर्छ त भन्ने नेपालको आफ्नो इन्ट्रेस्ट होला तर जियोपोलिटिक्सका कारणले त्यसमा चाहिँ एउटा डिस्टोर्सन आइराखेको छ अनि पोलिटिकल यो डेभलपमेन्टको विकासको नीतिमा मात्रै नभएर इभन सोसियल पोलिसिजमाहरू पनि जियोपोलिटिक्सको इम्प्याक्ट पर्ने गरेको देखिएको छ।
धन्यवाद अजयजी। अपेक्षा म फेरि तपाईँसँग आएँ। मैले एउटा अहिले भर्खर प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी लुक इस्ट पोलिसी ल्याउनु भयो होइन, त्यसबाट उहाँहरूले पुरै साउथ इस्ट एसियन कन्ट्रीको हेड अफ द स्टेट गभर्मेन्टलाई एकचोटि उहाँहरूले रिपब्लिक डेमा पुरै इन्भाइट गर्नुभयो एन्ड दे आर एक्सपेक्टिङ दिस इयर और नेक्स्ट इयर अगेन दे आर कमिङ अल द 10 कन्ट्री लिडर्स टु इन्डिया। सो मैले के देखेँ भने उताबाट पुरै इन्टिग्रेसन इस्टतिर पनि साउथ इस्ट एसियन कन्ट्रीसँग इन्डियाको बढिरहेको, त्यसमा बिम स्टेट इज वान अफ द मेजर इन्स्ट्रुमेन्ट फर देम। त्यसै गरी यो अहिले बङ्गलादेश र इन्डियाको बिचमा पनि र हाम्रो र इन्डियाको बिचमा पनि भइरहेको बेलामा खास गरी यो हामी त इन्डियासँगको ट्रेडमा हाम्रो त पोजिसन हामी के अरे भने ह्युज डिफिसिट छ इन्डियासँग पनि हाम्रो, तर यो आफै कन्ट्रीहरूको बिचमा ट्रेड मतलब किन हुन सकिरहेको छैन? यो इन्टिग्रेसन प्रोसेसमा पोलिटिकल इन्टिग्रेसन क्यान नट बी सक्सेस विदाउट द इकोनोमी, हामी थ्योरीमा पढ्दाखेरि पढेका छौँ। तर यो इन्टिग्रेसन आफैमा अब इन्डिया पाकिस्तानको प्रब्लम छ मानौँ एकछिनलाई, तर श्रीलङ्का इन्डिया, बङ्गलादेश इन्डिया, नेपाल इन्डिया, त्यसै गरी इन्डियासँग अरू भियतनाम भयो, कम्बोडिया भयो, यो इन्डोनेसिया, फिलिपिन्स यस्ता देशहरू यो किन भइरहेको छैन? त्यस्तो चाहिँ के लाग्छ, कसरी यसलाई इन्टिग्रेट गर्न सकिन्छ? केही ओपिनियन तपाईँ?
हस्, थ्याङ्क यू सर। मैले अघि नै पनि अलिकति यसमा रिफ्लेक्ट गरेको थिएँ है, पोलिटिकल कमिटमेन्ट चाहियो। सार्क किन फेलियर भयो भनेर अब हामी सबैजनालाई कुनै न कुनै आइडिया त छ, त्यही भएर जे इनिसिएटिभ काम गर्छ, विच एभर इनिसिएटिभ्स वर्क, एज लङ एज द पार्टिज क्यान कम टुगेदर एन्ड नेगोसिएट प्रपरली, दे सुड डु द्याट। अब जस्तो नर्थ इस्टलाई जोडेर लुक इस्ट जुन पोलिसी इन्डियाले उहाँहरूले इम्प्लिमेन्ट गर्न खोजिराख्नु भएको छ, इट्स अ ग्रेट इनिसिएटिभ। अब हाम्रो चाहिँ कति रोल हुन्छ त्यसमा भन्ने कुरा हो। अब इन्डियासँग पनि त्यही हो कि सबै कन्ट्रिजले चाहिँ कसरी अब लाइक इन्ट्रा कन्ट्रीमा होइन, इन्टर कन्ट्रीको त मैले भनिहालेँ, हाम्रो भित्र पनि रेगुलेसन्स गर्नु पऱ्यो, इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर यताउति छ। इन्ट्रा कन्ट्री नेगोसिएसनमा चाहिँ अलिकति फोकस हुनु पऱ्यो कि कसले ह्यान्डल गर्ने त। अब हामीले डिरेक्टली नर्थ इस्ट गभर्मेन्ट्सलाई त अप्रोच गर्न मिल्दैन होला कि उहाँहरूले भनिदिनु पऱ्यो, तर यो नेगोसिएसनहरू चाहिँ उठिरहेछ। नर्थ इस्टलाई कनेक्ट गर्ने उहाँहरूको प्लान छ, नर्थ इस्ट त कनेक्टेडै छैन। त्यही भएर BBIN या बिमस्टिकबाट हाम्रो नर्थ इस्ट कनेक्ट हुन्छ, नर्थ इस्ट बङ्गलादेश र भुटान आइडियली भयो भने चाहिँ मार्केट साइज पनि कम्पेरिटिभ छ कि, सो त्यत्रो जुन हामीले इन्डियासँग जहिले पनि त्यो ट्रेड डेफिसिट भन्छौँ नि, त्यहाँ चाहिँ कम्पिट गर्न सजिलो हुन्छ कि होइन। सरले भन्छ जस्तै अब प्रोडक्ट्स चाहियो होइन, तर वाइ रम्पम अचम्म लाग्छ नर्थ इस्टमा हाम्रो स्न्याक्सहरू तितौरा होइन, मणिपुरको पनि आउँछ, मणिपुरमा चाहिँ म्यानमारबाट आउँदो रहेछ कि, मेरो धेरै साथीहरू छन् नर्थ इस्टमा, म्यानमारमा पनि हाम्रो जस्तै तितौराहरू हुने कल्चरली यति सिमिलर छौँ है। त्यही भएर अलिकति इफ देयर इज अ पुश, इफ देयर इज अ पोलिटिकल विल, तर अगेन सर नेगोसिएसनमै आउँछ है। नेगोसिएसन भनेको चाहिँ फेरि एउटा म दुईवटा पोइन्ट गर्छु। एउटा चाहिँ नेगोसिएसन भनेको यस्तो होइन कि जो पावरफुल छ उसले जस्तो नेगोसिएसन गर्छ त्यस्तै मान्नुपर्छ भन्ने होइन। हामीले आई थिङ्क नेपाल एन्ड इन्डिया इज वान अफ द बिगेस्ट इक्जाम्पल टु अन्डरस्ट्यान्ड हाउ नेगोसिएसन्स आर सो कम्प्लिकेटेड बिट्विन countries whose power asymmetry is huge, right? If a negotiation is even concluded, it can still create problems for generations if it does not addresses or it does not create a sense of let's say equality among actors. So that is one. And the other thing, coming to geopolitics and everything that we were talking about, नेपालले चाहिँ एउटा कुरा चाहिँ हाम्रो मलाई नोटिस हुँदै गएको झन् यो जियोपोलिटिक्सको सेन्सिटिभिटिज बढ्दाखेरि चाहिँ, because Nepal is economically and politically a little weak, unstable politically and economically पनि अलिकति weak हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ till Nepal is vulnerable to external shocks, the reality is Nepal cannot secure anybody's interest, let alone its. I'm not trying to say that we are here to secure everybody else's interest, but the matter of the fact is we cannot secure our interests either. And this is a case we need to build, a stable Nepal, a Nepal that is strong in its economy, is only going to be capable. And I think all of our neighbors, all the other actors involved need to understand this, that till we are not strong enough, sorry to say, we cannot control anybody's interest. It's beyond us. We hardly can manage our interests. What interests are we going to manage of other actors, right? So I think this is again the focus that needs to be there.
Thank you, Apekshya. Now coming to our distinguished participant, I would like to सबैलाई request गर्छु, question आफ्नो परिचय दिएर गर्नु होला. साथीहरु माइक अवेलेबल गराइदिनुस्. Pranay, I have seen Pranay asking.
Thank you, Vijay. I'm Pranay. My question is to Dr. Wagle. I've been patiently listening to the panel, but I found something missing there. You seem to be overwhelmed by the idea of geopolitics, but geoeconomics seems to be missing out of the picture. The point I wish to make is a comment and a question. The panel was talking about 1950s and the 60s, but if we look at today, we have two neighbors who produce the amount of dollar produced outside the United States is right in our neighborhood. The point I'm making is the new development and the economic push and pull that is generated from both north and south. What kind of impact that is going to have on Nepal in terms of shaping its response? Second, I think we did not mention one other very important thing. The rise of India and China is seriously challenging the post-1945 global order, and Americans are having a hard time managing that. I think we are not deliberating on that issue. Be that you talk about how Northeast India is connected to the larger Southeast Asia, or the other parts of initiative, BBIN or all of that. I think the larger ideological point is that both India and China are trying to subvert the post-1945 world order that the Americans and its European partners put into place. So if you could, and the last part of the question is also for the fellow panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Pranay. Buddhi Narayanji.
However, we have Achyut Wagle. I have been very small quality to read. American and Chinese high-ranking dignitaries in Nepal frequently or reciprocally, I practically. The visit is something like a kind of competition. Chinese high-ranking person visited last week to Nepal, and American personality is arriving tomorrow afternoon. So my query on this aspect is, what are the main reasons of this visit to tiny country Nepal? Is there any unseen or hidden diplomatic interest in this context? I have a query that what diplomatic role should be played by Nepal for the protection of national integrity, sovereignty of Nepal? Thank you. Okay, just another. I have another question to
Apekshya.
Apekshya Shah. Thank you. उहाँले नेपाल बङ्गलादेशको हाइड्रोपावरको कुरा गर्नुभयो। मलाई लागेको जिज्ञासा चाहिँ छ, नेपाल र बङ्गलादेशले हाइड्रोपावर ट्रेड गर्ने भनेर सिग्नेचर पनि गरेको जस्तो मलाई लाग्दछ र यो कन्टेक्स्टमा अब नेपालबाट बङ्गलादेश जानको निमित्त इन्डियन टेरिटोरी भएर जानुपर्ने हुन्छ। हाम्रो झापाको काँक्राभिट्टाबाट 23 किलोमिटरको चिकन नेक टेरिटोरी छ र अब मैले यो पुनः किन भनिरहेको भनेदेखि चाहिँ केही दशक अगाडि नेपाल र बङ्गलादेशको बिचमा सर्फेस रोडबाट ट्रेड एन्ड ट्रान्जिट गर्ने सम्झौता भएको थियो। भारतले स्वीकृति पनि दिएको थियो र कतिपय बक्सरबन्द गाडीहरू आउने जाने पनि गरेको थियो। तर यो के कारणले गर्दाखेरि रोकियो र मलाई उहाँलाई प्रश्न चाहिँ के छ भनेदेखि क्रिटिकल्ली इन्डियाले एग्री गर्न सक्छ नेपालको पावर ट्रान्समिसन अब बङ्गलादेश पुर्याउन, तर इन प्र्याक्टिस कस्तो होला तपाईँको विचार के छ? धन्यवाद।
नमस्कार, बाबुराम विश्वकर्मा हो, पत्रकार हो। डक्टर वाग्लेलाई मेरो प्रश्न छ, फरेन मिनिस्ट्रीले चाहिँ नि अपोज गर्दा गर्दै, परराष्ट्र मन्त्रालयले अपोज गर्दा गर्दै राष्ट्रपतिले ग्लोबल सेक्युरिटी इनिसिएटिभमा भिडियो कन्फरेन्स मार्फत उहाँले पार्टिसिपेट गर्नुहुन्छ कि हुँदैन, एउटा मेरो प्रश्न। यति धेरै पेनिट्रेसन भइसक्यो जियोपोलिटिक्समा हाम्रो, जे अमेरिकाबाट प्रस्ताव आएपछि एमसिसी अगाडि लिएर जाउँ भन्दाखेरि पनि पुरै बेसिक चाहिँ नि एकदम मिल्ने भएदेखि गनै लिएर आउने, एसपिपी चाहिँ यहाँ इन्डोर्स हुने बेलामा पनि गनै लिएर आउने, पेलोसीको चाहिँ नि यता ताइवानमा भिजिट हुन्छ, नेपालले केही न केही चाहिँ नि बोलिदियोस् भनेर पुरै दौडधुप आदि इत्यादि। अब अघि नै कुरा यहाँ छलफल पनि भयो, शीतल निवासले चाहिँ फरेन पोलिसी एउटा प्यारलल एउटा लिड गरिरहेको छ, खास गरी चाइनिज इन्ट्रेस्टमा यो सबै गरिराखेको छ, अरू कुराहरूमा पनि। तर यति धेरै यत्रो एउटा ड्यामेजै हुने लेभलमा गइसकेको देखिन्छ हाम्रो यो सबै पार्टी टु पार्टी, गभर्मेन्टको अर्को, त्यसपछि शीतल निवासको यो सबै कुराहरू सारा हेर्दाखेरि हामी एउटा एकदमै कोमामा जस्तो देश पुगिसकेको स्थितिमा यसलाई करेक्सन गर्नलाई नेपालले चाहिँ के गर्नुपर्छ?
हुन्छ बाबुराम, थ्याङ्क यू। म एकचोटि प्यानललाई भन्छु यसको रिस्पोन्ड गर्नलाई सर्ट एन्ड क्विक, त्यसपछि फेरि आउँला।
धन्यवाद प्रणवजीको। म अघि अङ्ग्रेजीमा मात्रै बोलेर गल्ती भयो साहब, म नेपालीमा बोल्छु। प्रणवजीको दुईवटा क्वेसनमा एउटा चाहिँ नि हाम्रो स्टेक एउटै कुरा के भएको छ भने द चाइनिज एन्ड अमेरिकनहरूको बार्गेन हेज बिन टफ विथ युनाइटेड स्टेट्स फर द भेरी रिजन यो तपाईँले भन्नुभएको मुख्य कारणले गर्दाखेरि अब अहिले युएस करेन्सीको स्टक पाइल चाइनामा सबभन्दा ठुलो छ, उनीहरूको बन्ड गभर्मेन्ट बन्ड चाहिँ नि सबभन्दा ठुलो छ। अब यति हुँदाहुँदै पनि एउटा इन्ट्रेस्टिङ कुरा के छ भने यो हामी नन ट्रान्सप्यारेन्ट वर्ल्डमा कति दिन बाँच्न सक्छौँ र त्यो कति सस्टेन गर्न सक्छ भन्ने बिगर क्वेसन छ। सो अर्को अब यसलाई मैले अहिले त्यति नै भने। अब यसमा चाहिँ नि तपाईँ चाइनाले पनि एउटा इम्पोर्टेन्ट कुरा के हो भनेदेखि इन्डियाले पनि फर द्याट म्याटर उनीहरू मोर इनवर्ड लुकिङ भएर नै आफ्नो स्ट्राटेजीलाई सफल पार्छु भनेर सोच्यो भने त्यो हुँदैन रहेछ भन्ने बिआरआईले पनि देखाए। मैले अघि पनि भने बिआरआई सुरु गरेपछि पैसा दिन्छु भनेपछि सबै आफ्नो शर्तमा गर्छु भनेर चाइनाले सोचेको थियो, तर पछि हाम्रो वर्ल्ड ब्याङ्कको जस्तै ट्रान्सपेरेन्ट ब्याज दरमा ट्रान्सपेरेन्सी पे ब्याक पिरियडमा नेगोसिएसन हुँदै 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 आएर अब त्यतिले पनि नभएर अब यो दुईवटा चाहिने त्यो स्ट्रिङ अफ पर्ल्स र यो डेट ट्र्याप सिन्ड्रोम दुईटाको जुन स्ट्राटेजी छ त्यसलाई चाहिँ नि रिभिजिट नगरिकन अब बिआरआई चल्दैन, पैसा त्यसै बसिरह्यो, अलिअलि जति अफ्रिकामा खर्च भयो जति पाकिस्तानमा खर्च भयो चाइनिजहरू पनि त्यहाँनिर आइपुगेका छन्। अब तपाईँले अघि नयाँ पोस्ट 1945 को कुरा गर्नुभयो, त्यसमा आएको अहिले बिगेस्ट मेटा न्यारेटिभ्स हामी जसलाई भन्छौँ त्यो मेटा न्यारेटिभ्स चाहिँ के हो भने क्यान यु डेभलप अ कन्ट्री विदाउट डेमोक्रेसी? Can China be the world model to develop economy without democracy, without international partnership? सबैसँग कुस्ती नै गरेर country develop हुन सक्छ? Can that be a world leader? Very big question. अब अहिले we have only looked at the poverty reduction rate in China. चाइनाको गरिबी यसरी घट्यो किनभने our biggest pain is on poverty reduction. तर when it actually comes to a very meaningful prosperity, त्यो चाहिँ नि without freedom को economic achievement like will people start to enjoy that generation after generation? यो एउटा bigger narrative छ। मलाई के लाग्छ भने we need to wait for the next generation of the politics even in China. यो first generationले prosperity create गर्यो, poverty reduce गर्यो विदाउट डेमोक्रेसी हाम्रो डेफिनेसनमा वेस्टर्न डेफिनेसनमा विदाउट डेमोक्रेसी गर्यो तर यो तपाईँले भन्नुभएको जुन प्याराडाइम सिफ्ट भएको छ त्यसको लागि चाहिँ नि क्यान दे अल्सो सस्टेन दिस with the similar degree of political instability they are at least aspiring for? यो एकदम बिगर क्वेसन छ अब अहिले तपाईले मलाई क्वेसन सोध्दा मैले दिने छैन तर न्यू डिस्कोर्स विल बी टु दैट डाइरेक्सन अब भोलिको डिप्लोमेसी चाहिँ नि हामी यहाँ डिप्लोमेटिक झगडा गर्दा गर्दै ठुलो बाढी आएर ठुलो वाइल्ड फायरले संसार ध्वस्त हुने ठाउँमा आइपुगेको छ भने क्लाइमेट डिप्लोमेसी इज गोइङ टु बी अ रेस्पोन्सिबल क्लाइमेट डिप्लोमेसी आई वुड से इज गोइङ टु बी द मेन स्टे अफ डिप्लोमेटिक इन्टरेक्सन्स र त्यसमा चाहिँ नि एनी पार्टी प्रोबेबली नो पार्टी क्यान ब्याक आउट त्यो चाहिँ अहिले हामीले युरोपमा आएको बाढी बेलायतमा पुगेको 45 डिग्रीको तापक्रम डढेलो लागेपछि महिनौसम्म चाहिँ नि निभाउन नसकेर thousands, millions of hectares of land, glacier melt, Antarctica to North Pole, यो सबै चाहिँ नि हामीले चाइनाले कति ट्रेड गर्यो भन्दा धेरै पर पुगिसकेका छौँ त्यसो भएको हुनाले दिस कुड बी बाइन्डिङ फोर्सेस इन डिप्लोमेसी एज वेल अब बुद्धि सरको क्वेसनमा यो अमेरिकन चाइनिज भिजिटहरूको कुरा गर्नुभयो यसमा लुकाउनु पर्ने केही नै छैन दे हेभ गट vested interest. They have got their national security interest. Everybody has. Otherwise, why would any country post their diplomatic mission in any country? If we are not to promote our interest, why do we need to have 36 diplomatic mission spending millions of rupees every year? The reason is we want to also further our interest. We may have failed. Our politics may have failed the mission. It is obvious they have got the interest. Only very small margin where we needed to work and where we actually failed is how can we realign our interest, our national interest with their interest. Where we need to negate their interest to put our priority on the first place. त्यति कुरा छुटेको हो अब मैले यसो हेर्दाखेरि मलाई के लाग्छ भनेदेखि अहिलेसम्मको संसारको डिप्लोमेसी सक्सेसफुल डिप्लोमेसी नेशनल इन्ट्रेस्ट हेर्नुभयो भनेदेखि टु थिङ्स ह्यापन प्यारलल तपाईले पोस्ट वर्ल्ड वारको जर्मनी र फ्रान्स हेर्नुभयो भनेदेखि दे वर एनिमिज दे फट फ्रम डिफरेन्ट पोल्स ड्युरिङ द वर्ल्ड वार 2 तर उनीहरूको पिपल टु पिपल बिचको इकोनोमिक इन्टरेक्सन चाहिँ नि स्टप भएन कहिले पनि द इकोनोमिक इन्टरेक्सन हेज कन्टिन्युड अहिले तपाईँ जापान र चाइना भन्नुहोस् जापान र अमेरिका भन्नुहोस् चाइना एन्ड युएस आर द लार्जेस्ट ट्रेड पार्टनर्स अफ द वर्ल्ड डिस्पाइट सो मच अफ अ फाइट क्यान यु बिलिभ द्याट कम टु रिजनल लेभल इन्डिया एन्ड चाइना आर इन द सिमिलर ट्र्याजेक्टरी त्यसो भएको हुनाले हामी जति यो प्यासनेट भएर नेसनलिजमको कुरा गर्छौँ डिप्लोमेसीको कुरा गर्छौँ फरेन पोलिसीको कुरा गर्छौँ हाम्रो इकोनोमिक इन्टरेक्सन विथ आवर डेभलपमेन्ट पार्टनर्स नेबर्स र स्ट्रेटेजिक इन्ट्रेस्ट सोभरेन्टीको इन्ट्रेस्ट होला बोर्डरको इस्यु होला अरू 10वटा चाहिँ नि इस्यु होला त्यो इस्युलाई हामीले चाहिँ नि बाइफोर्केट गर्न सकेनौँ भने आई थिङ्क द्याट इज वेयर वी आर फेलिङ अब यो चाहिँ जुन हाम्रो स्मल कन्ट्रीको कम्पल्सन्स छ तपाईँलाई लाग्छ होला बाबुरामजी यो नेपालको मात्रै हो दे रिड द हिस्ट्री अफ प्याराग्वे बिट्विन अर्जेन्टिना एन्ड ब्राजिल very very comparable. Read the history of Austria, which sits by the side of very powerful Germany. So it is a small and big country relations is comparable everywhere. So एउटा कुरा सत्य के हो भने you cannot develop your country being at the neighborhood of a rich country. Mexico is the biggest example. Being in the economic, bordering with the economic superpower of the world, look at the Mexico. हाम्रो भन्दा धेरै राम्रो छ भन्न सक्नु होला. Look at the governance. The PRI भन्ने एउटा पार्टी थियो. There was a political party called PRI, which is called the federal system. For 80 years, exactly 80 years from 1920 to 2000, it was very infamous for the centralized federalism. Ruled by the single party PRI. 1990 सम्म त PRI कै थियो त्यसपछि अलि रिफर्म भएर आयो त्यसो भएको हुनाले हामी एउटा भ्रमबाट हामी चाहिँ नि प्रस्पेरिटीको भ्रमबाट केबाट आउट हुनु पर्यो भने चाइना पनि ग्रो गरिरहेछ, इन्डिया पनि ग्रो गरिरहेछ, हामी त बिचमा छौँ, हामी त त्यसै ग्रो गर्छौँ. नो, यु विल बी स्यान्डविच, यु विल बी डेसिकेटेड, यु विल बी स्यान्डविच भेरी ब्याडली इफ यु डोन्ट ह्याभ युर ओन स्ट्राटेजी. अहिले भएको त्यही हो. वी आर ओन्ली लुकिङ आउटवर्ड. चाइनाले के गर्छ, इन्डियाले के गर्छ, हामी के गर्छौँ चाहिँ थाहा छैन. वाट वी आर डुइङ, एन्सर त त्यहाँनिर चाहियो नि त. लेट्स आस्क आवर सेल्फ वाट वी क्यान डु, वाट वी आर डुइङ द राइट थिङ. हामीलाई मोदीजीले यसो भन्नुभयो, उहाँले नेभरहुड फर्स्ट ल्याउनु भयो, सी जिनपिङले बिआरआई ल्याउनु भयो, हाम्रो देउबाजीले के ल्याउनु भयो त, राष्ट्रपतिजीले के ल्याउनु भयो त. अब यही बाबुरामजीको क्वेसनमा राष्ट्रपतिजीको क्वेसन पनि आयो जोडिएर. एउटै कुरा, हामीले कस्तो लेम डक पोलिसी बनायौँ फरेन पोलिसी भने कसको रोल के हो भन्ने केही पनि डिमार्केसन छैन. फरेन पोलिसीमा एक्टिभ पोलिटिक्समा वाट क्यान नट राष्ट्रपति डु भन्ने कहिले पनि लेखेको छैन. मैले हिजोको आर्टिकलमा लेखेको छु, संविधानले यो 2 चोटि पास गरेर गएपछि राष्ट्रपतिले हस्ताक्षर गर्नुहुन्छ, अथेन्टिकेट गरेपछि भने रहेछ. नगर्यो भने के हुन्छ के पनि लेखेको छैन. 2 चोटि संसदले पास गरेर लगेर राष्ट्रपतिले हस्ताक्षर गर्नु भएन भने अटोमेटिकली ल हुन्छ भन्ने एउटा फ्रेज राख्न सकिँदैन थियो र भने चार चोटि गयो नि त सदनमा, अप्पर हाउसमा लोवर हाउसमा 2 चोटि गएपछि राष्ट्रपतिले गर्नुहोस् नगर्नुहोस् थाहा छैन, त्यो चाहिँ ल बन्छ भनेर एउटा लाइन राख्न सकिँदैन थियो र. कन्स्टिट्युसनमा बनाएको कुरा बिगेस्ट फ्ल भनेपछि हाम्रो फरेन पोलिसीमा पनि द डिमार्केसन्स अफ द रोल्स एन्ड रेस्पोन्सिबिलिटिज अफ द अल स्टेक होल्डर्स भन्ने अचेल वर्ड एकदम पपुलर छ, लेट मी युज द्याट. त्यो कुरा चाहिँ नि फरेन पोलिसीमा आर्टिकुलेट नहुँदाखेरिको यो प्रब्लम हो. अर्को कुरा हामीले सधैँ भनिराखेका छौँ, इन्स्टिट्युसनल मेमोरीको धेरैजनाले धेरै ठाउँमा भन्नुभएको छ. इफ यु वान्ट टु रन अ कन्ट्री विथ अ डिप्लोमेसी एन्ड स्ट्रेटेजी, institutional memory is the most important thing, and you don't have a record of anything in this country. Thank you.
Ajay ji, केही छ?
खालि मेरो एउटा बुद्धिनारायणजीकोमा चाहिँ किन अमेरिका र चाइनाको नेताहरू एकपछि अर्को गर्दै भेट्न आउँछ, त्यसको के फाइदा छ भन्दाखेरि मेरो एउटा चाहिँ के भन्छ एजम्सन हैन, इन एडिसन टु डिप्लोमेटिक बेनिफिट्सहरू त छँदैछ, त्यो सँगसँगै अरू के फाइदा रहेछ भन्दाखेरि मैले यसो कुराकानीमा बुझ्दाखेरि चाहिँ एउटा एस्योरेन्स र रिएस्योरेन्स अर्थात् अफर्मेसन र रिअफर्मेसन फरेन पोलिसी त भइहाल्यो, त्यो सँगसँगै एउटा चाहिँ इन्टेलिजेन्स ग्यादरिङको लागि पनि एकदम युजफुल हुँदो रहेछ. र अर्को चाहिँ अप्टिक्सको लागि विशेष गरिकन अमेरिका र चाइनाले एकअर्कासँग पनि कुरा गरिरहेका हुन्छन्, नेपालसँग मात्रै नभएर उनीहरूले देखिस् त भनेर देखाउनलाई त्यो अप्टिक्सको पनि यो 4वटा पनि एलिमेन्ट हुँदो रहेछ जस्तो लाग्छ. थ्याङ्क यू.
Right. Pranab Daiko question right. So norm changing. I think this was again brought up on the last talk when we norm changing countries aru. So yeah. So पहिला चाहिँ हामीले China मात्रै we thought that only China was targeting to change the international system, but then now we see India also on board, and this is not actually very new. I think we've always spoken about how the UN needs to be reformed. The discussion about Security Council has always been there, right? So in this context again, right, so I think I forgot to mention that this is why countries like Nepal have to be extra careful. That what is it in for us? Like, because India and China are again bigger powers, right? And if they come together, they could create a very different regional order, but what about the smaller actors? And this is something that even I'm getting a little concerned about, is that our bigger powers, while implementing whatever the policies they want to endorse, how much are they considering the reaction and the concerns of the smaller actors, right? For us to be, we've been a very loyal friend to the international community. We've been supportive of the international system for the longest time. So what is it in for us? Because we do not have the power capacity to bargain like India and China. So we need to look into what are the norms they want to change, and is it only for them? And what do we have? So if it's only about India and China going into Security Council, then well, good for you. Please have a run at that. अनि बुद्ध सरले भन्नुभएको क्वेसनमा चाहिँ नेपाल र बङ्गलादेशको, हजुर सर मलाई थाहा भएन अहिले चाहिँ त्यही अब नेपाल र बङ्गलादेश अलिकति ट्रिकी छ हैन, इन्डियाको ठाउँ टेरिटरी भएको भएर जस्तो 27 किलोमिटरमा पनि हामीले 1970s मै थर्ड कन्ट्री ट्रान्जिट पाउँदा पनि इन्डियाबाट एक्सेस पाएनौँ 2010 मा शेख हसिना जीको भिजिटमा चाहिँ उहाँहरूले नर्थ इस्टलाई एक्सेस दिनुभयो त्यति बेला चाहिँ ल हुन्छ ट्रान्जिट पास भयो 2016 मा भएर 2019 मा फर्टिलाइजर आएको छ हैन थर्ड कन्ट्री ट्रान्जिटमा सो अलमोस्ट 20 वर्ष लाग्यो सो त्यही भएर रिजनल इन्टिग्रेसन चाहिँ अलिकति स्लो नै हो तर अब चाहिँ पिकअप गर्छ कि भन्ने आश छ तर त्यसमा पनि आई थिङ्क एउटा पोइन्ट जुन हजुर साउथ इस्ट एसियन कन्ट्रिजको सोद्धाखेरि पनि आई थिङ्क पिपल टु प्राइभेट सेक्टर र पिपल टु पिपल को रिलेसन्स पनि यति इन्फ्लुएन्सियल हुँदै गएको छ डिप्लोमेटिक प्र्याक्टिसेसमा त्यो एङ्गल पनि हेर्नुपर्छ कि जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ है प्राइभेट सेक्टर पर्टिकुलरली प्राइभेट सेक्टर क्यान प्ले अ भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट रोल इन पुसिङ द गभर्मेन्ट एन्ड इभन पिपल टु पिपल रिलेसन्स कुड गो अ भेरी लङ वे इन मेकिङ डिप्लोमेटिक रिलेसन्स मोर एक्टिभ एन्ड स्ट्रङ राइट
यसको म तपाईँलाई सर्टमा भनिदिन्छु हाम्रो दाल अलैँची र केही कुराहरू जाने गर्थ्यो उताबाट ट्रान्जिट भएर थर्ड कन्ट्रीसम्म किन आएन भने इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चरै थिएन त्यो बङ्गलाबन्द पोर्टबाट जुन हाम्रोसम्म आइपुग्नु पर्ने हो त्यो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर थिएन र त्यसैलाई एसियन हाइवेको कन्सेप्ट पनि त्यही बेला आएको थियो र बङ्गलादेशको त्यो एरियामा अर्को पनि एउटा ठुलो च्यालेन्ज थियो विच इज नाउ रिड्युस द्याट वाज ए के भन्छ भने टेररिजमको पनि थियो त्यहाँ चाहिँ सेपरेटिस्ट मुभमेन्ट पनि थियो त्यो के अरे भने के एरिया भन्छ त्यसलाई त्यो एरियामा त्यो पनि थियो अर्को पार्ट के हो भने बुझ्दाखेरि हामी कहाँ भुटानिज रिफ्युजी भुटानमा पनि डिस्टर्बेन्स नर्थ इस्ट इन्डियामा पनि छ त्यसैले त्यो इन्डियाको लागि पनि हाइली सेक्युरिटी सेन्सिटिभ एरिया मानिन्छ तर भयो के भने अघि डाक्टर वाग्लेले भने जस्तो हामीले पठाउने के अब अर्को देशबाट ल्याएर डिब्बा प्याकिङ गरेर पठाउने मात्र हो दाल जति जम्मै इन्डियाबाट ल्याए चोरेर अनि यताबाट फेरि प्याक गरेर उता पठाइदियो हामीले पठाउने के द्याट इज द बिगेस्ट च्यालेन्ज वाट यु प्रोड्युस त्यो के पठाउने त्यो उहाँले भने जस्तो त्यो ह्यान्डिक्राफ्टको त त्यो केही पनि हुँदैन त्यसले त त्यसैले बिगेस्ट च्यालेन्ज त्यो पनि हो त्यहाँ दुई तिनवटा मैले आफैले पढेर भनेको मात्र हो एनीबडी वान्टेड टु कन्ट्रिब्युट प्लिज धनप्रसाद पण्डितजी प्रोफेसर धनप्रसाद पण्डित प्लिज
सायद बिजुली एउटा एक्सपोर्टको लागि आइटम हो जस्तो मलाई लाग्छ बङ्गलादेश रेडी टु इन्भेस्ट इन नेपाल फर हाइड्रो पावर इन्डियाले के भन्छ मेरो बाहेक अरू लगाएको म इम्पोर्ट गर्दिनँ भन्छ इन्डियाको मार्केट नगएर बङ्गलादेशको मार्केट पाइँदैन त्यस कारण के सम्भव छ हामीले साना अरू देश छैनन् र स्विजरल्यान्डको एकातिर जर्मनी छ अर्कोतिर फ्रान्स छ दुवै बिग पावर युरोपको लागि तर स्विजरल्यान्ड इज गेटिङ बेनिफिट फ्रम बोथ साइड त्यसकारण यदि भित्रीदेखि सदिच्छा छ भने इन्डियाले बाटो दिएर नेपालले बिजुली बेच्न सक्छ एकदम सजिलोसँग जहाँसम्म हाम्रो चाइनासँग होइन यो विशेष चाइना र अमेरिकाको कुरा भयो भने चाइनाको प्लेनको कसले कुरा गरेर नेपाल एयरलाइन ध्वस्त हुनुमा बाबुराम भट्टराईजी प्रधानमन्त्री भएको बेला किनेका र गिफ्ट पाएका मलाई थाहा छैन 3टा प्लेन ल्याएर नेपालको आरएनएस ध्वस्त हुनुमा एउटा ठुलो भूमिका खेल्यो अर्को नारायणी घाट फुटबल बाटो अहिले पर्सनको घरपट्टि र चाइनाको ठेकदारी उस्तै हो पर्सनको घरपट्टिले पुलदेखि सडकसम्म ध्वस्त बनाएको छ चाइनाको जुनसुकै कम्पनी आए पनि त्यो चाइनिज गभर्मेन्टको कन्ट्रोलमा हुन्छ चाइनिज गभर्मेन्टको कन्ट्रोल भनेपछि कस्तो हुन्छ भन्दा धनप्रसाद पण्डित 2007मा मङ्गोलिया गएको थियो पिस एन्ड डेमोक्रेसीको एउटा सेमिनारमा मलाई मङ्गोलियाको एयरपोर्टबाट चाइनिज एम्बेसडरले निकालिदियो प्लेनमा चढिसकेपछि किन निकाल्यो भन्दा पिस एन्ड डेमोक्रेसीको कुरा गर्ने मान्छे तिब्बतको बाटो नेपाल फर्कन सक्दैन भनेर देयर वाज नो अदर रुट मसँग अर्को इन्डिया जाउँ भने बङ्गलादेशबाट फेरि भिसा चाहिन्छ किनभने थर्ड कन्ट्रीबाट आउँदाखेरि वी निड भिसा हामी नेपालबाट इन्डिया जाँदा समस्या छैन त्यसकारण मेरो प्लेन टिकट क्यान्सल भयो मैले त्यसपछि मङ्गोलियाका प्रोफेसरसँग ऋण लिएर अनि कोरियाको बाटो काठमाडौँ फर्किनु पऱ्यो त्यसकारण हाम्रा दुईटा छिमेकी पर्यो भने गुन्डागर्दीको लागि तयार हुने पर्यो भने पोलिटिकल प्रेसरको लागि हप्ताको भिजिट पनि गर्ने तर भित्रीदेखि सदा यता कसैको पनि छैन र अर्कोले बनाएर हामी बन्दैनौँ हामी आफै बन्ने हो दुईटा वाग्लेहरू
दुईटै एउटा रजिस्ट्रार हुनुहुन्छ अहिले तर प्रधानमन्त्रीको सल्लाहकार हुनुहुन्थ्यो अर्को पनि योजनाको अध्यक्ष हुनुहुन्छ यदि पत्रकार मात्र भएको भए उहाँहरूको बोलाइ पनि नहुने इफ यु आर डुअर you have to show how do we can develop the country पोजिसन पाइसकेपछि पोजिसन नपाएको मान्छेले बोल्न सकिन्छ बोल्न हुन्छ पोजिसन पाएको मान्छेले पोजिसनको बेलामा के मैले कन्ट्रिब्युट गरेँ र यो देशलाई के दिएँ पद्मगम्य क्याम्पस भएको बेलामा मैले के गरेँ विश्वभरमा क्याम्पस भएको बेलामा के गरेँ त्यसकारण यु हेभ टु थिङ्क अबाउट 1990 यो भन्दा पहिले अमेरिकन एम्बेसीले के भने नेपालको फरेन पोलिसी 90% म कन्ट्रोल गर्छु 9% इन्डिया गर्छ 1% रेस्ट अफ द वर्ल्ड गर्छ भनेर भनेको थियो यो जुन अमेरिकन एम्बेसीलाई 1987 मा इटी गर्यो अमेरिका जस्तो विश्वको शक्तिशाली राष्ट्रको एम्बेसीलाई नेपालको राजाले फिर्ता पठाइदियो किनभने नेपालमा आएको फरेन एड धेरै नेपालको शासकको इन्ट्रेस्टको लागि खर्च हुन्छ नेपालमा जनताले पाउँदैन भने बापत त्यही एम्बेसडरले धुलीखेल गेस्ट हाउसमा भनेको त्यो भनेको कुरा द्याट टाइम ल्याङ्ग्वेज टिचर विथ अमेरिकन पिस कोड मैले डाइरेक्ट उसको मुखबाट सुनेको र म भागी भएको हुनाले त्यसकारण अहिले नेपालको फरेन यो जियोपोलिटिकल सिचुएसन र नेपालको फरेन पोलिसी इन्डिया चाइना र अमेरिकामा यो त्रिखुट्टी भएको छ पक्कै पनि यो विषयमा खुलेर तीनैजना चारैजनाबाट कुरा आएन वी हेभ टु टक अबाउट द फ्याक्ट नभए अलिअलि डेटा त जसले पनि दिन सक्छ त्यो डेटा दिन ठुलो कुरा होइन अहिले आज पनि अमेरिकाको एकजना हुनुहुन्छ त्यसकारण यो हरेक हप्ता हरेक महिना हुने कन्ट्री like China and India, like America, both are trying to stay global power and to be global power. They are pushing Nepal. Tibet is one of the factors. Another thing, Nepal, American embassy in Kathmandu control East Asia and Southeast Asia.
Thank you.
It keeps biggest position in Asian country. त्यसकारण यो चाहिँ तपाईहरुले भनेको भन्दा म नयाँ कुरा म तपाईलाई भन्दिए विरामले धन्यवाद.
Thank you. Anybody have a question? Yeah, please. Leela ji.
Namaste.
Dr. Leela Neche.
मेरो प्रश्न नै मात्र छ. खनालजीले भन्नुभएको थियो यदि मैले सही सुने भने नेपालमा यदि संयुक्त सन्तुलित कूटनीति राखिराख्ने हो भने अहिलेको जस्तै गठबन्धन टाइपको कोही अमेरिकापट्टि फर्केका कोही चाइनापट्टि फर्केका सरकारका मान्छेहरू राख्नुपर्छ भनेर भन्नुभएको थियो. मैले सही बुझेँ भने है. मलाई चाहिँ कौतूहलता के भने कुनै निश्चित कामै गर्न नसक्ने सरकार पालेर के गर्ने के होला एउटा यो. अनि दोस्रो मेरो प्रश्न चाहिँ व्यक्तिगत रूपमा कसैले मलाई कुनै बेला के भनेको थियो भने आफू कसरी निश्चित राजदूतावासबाट जोगिएँ भनेर सुनाउनु भएको थियो. एकदमै अचम्म लागेको थियो. अबको यो चुनावपछि के होला भनेर हामी जसरी नेपाली कुरिरहेका छौँ विदेशी झन् बढ्ता सचेत भएर कुरेको जस्तो लाग्छ. यो चुनावमा अघि भनेको तपाईँले भन्नुभए जस्तै निश्चित देशकाले निश्चित पार्टीकाले पैसा दिने रोक्ने कसरी होला. अझै मात्र आचार संहिताको के कुरा समाचारमा पनि है. यो दुईटा प्रश्न राखेँ. धन्यवाद.
डाक्टर केशवजी पछाडि है रसिला केशव.
सर्वप्रथम त चाहिँ मलाई यहाँ बोलाउनु भएकोमा हाम्रो विजय सरलाई धन्यवाद दिन्छु. अनि अब यहाँ प्रेजेन्टेसन्स बडा राम्रो सुनियो सबैको तर्फबाट हाम्रो अच्युत सरको हाम्रो स्वर्णिमजीको अनि हाम्रो अजयको अनि हाम्रो उहाँहरूको. मेरो प्रश्न चाहिँ के भने वी टक सो मच अबाउट अब प्रो अमेरिकनको पोलिसी वाट अमेरिकन पोलिसी सुड बी अर वाट द चाइनिज पोलिसी सुड बी अर वाट इन्डियन पोलिसी सुड बी भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ नि बडा हाम्रो नेरेटिभ चाहिँ नि वाट नेपाल सुड बी भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ नि अलिकति फोकस हुनुपर्ने हो. जस्तो यो हामी जियो पोलिटिक्सको कुरा यो नेपाल आज 239 वर्ष हो. जहिले पनि मैले यसो हेर्दाखेरि यहाँ मार्क नगर्नु होला, यो गोर्खे राज्यको नै बढी चाहिँ नि यो जियोपोलिटिक्स कुरा गरेर देख्छु क्या। नेपाल भन्ने चाहिँ नि उता डोटी पनि मिलेर भए हो, त्यसपछि उता अर्को पूर्वको राज्य पनि मिलेर भए हो भने त्यहाँको मनस्थिति त्यहाँको मेन्टालिटीलाई प्रेजेन्ट नगर्ने खालि काठमाडौँ चौखण्डीभित्र बसेर हामीले खालि जियोपोलिटिक्स छुस्स गरेर जियोपोलिटिक्स फुस्स गरेर जियोपोलिटिक्स भन्दा त्यो न्यारेटिभमा चाहिँ नि अलिकति तीभित्र नि त आखिर त नेपाल त आज नेपाल भन्ने नाउँ त झन्डै 2500-3000 वर्षदेखि बचिया छ भन्छन्। भन्दाखेरि यस्तो प्रोग्राम अलिकति त्यो हाम्रो वाट सुड बी नेपाल के हुनु पर्थ्यो प्रोग्राम हाम्रो चाहिँ नि हामीले बिजनेसको ठुल्ठुलो कुरा गरे पनि 700-800 वर्षको हामीले हेऱ्यौँ भने जहिले पनि यहाँ त हामी त के अरे बिचा मिडलम्यान बसेर खाएको त हो नि। इन्डियाबाट ल्याएर चाहिँ टिबेट पठाउने, टिबेटबाट ल्याएर इन्डिया पठाउने हो हाम्रो यहाँको खास ठुलो स्केलको इन्डस्ट्रियलाइजेसनको कुरा पनि छैन। त्यो कन्टेक्स्टमा अहिले हामीले 700 वर्ष अगाडिको लर्निङलाई अहिले ल्याउँदाखेरि पनि हामी अहिले पनि त बिचमा सामान नगयो नि। अब अहिले चाहिँ खालि इम्पोर्ट मात्र गरेर आएको छौँ। अजय सरले भन्नुभयो 700 गुणा चाइनाको इम्पोर्ट हुन्छ, इन्डियाको 200 गुणा इम्पोर्ट हुन्छ भने। त यसलाई कसरी गर्ने भने त नयाँ एप्रोच जहाँ सोध्नु पऱ्यो। नेपाललाई चाहिँ ब्रोडर क्या, हामीले चाहिँ नि उता सुदूरपश्चिमको नेपाल पनि यहाँ आउनु पऱ्यो, पूर्वको नेपाल पनि आउनु पऱ्यो, गोर्खे नेपाल पनि आउनु पऱ्यो, न कि यहीँको मात्रै सेन्ट्रिक हुनु भएन भने। थ्याङ्क यू केशवजी।
एटिएममा चाइनिज भाषा किन आएछ कसरी आएछ भने मलाई गजबको अब्जर्भेसन लागेको, मेरो अब्जर्भेसन तर गजब लागेको त्यो एउटा मैले पाएँ अहिले रिसेन्टली। सबैमा होइन होला तर मैले ग्लोबल आइएमई र अरू 1-2वटा ब्याङ्क युज गर्छु, त्यहाँ चाहिँ मैले यही चाइनिज ल्याङ्ग्वेज देखेँ एउटा। ओके, अर्को चाहिँ मेरो कुरा के हो भने हाम्रो यो फन्ड पोलिसीको बारेमा आइडियोलोजिकल डिभिजनको बारेमा लामो कुरा भएको छ, डिस्कसन नै भएको छ, जहिले पनि हुन्छ। तर मैले एउटा कुरा बुझ्न खोजेको कुरा के भने हामीले मेरो अलिक चासो चाइनामा भएर अहिले पछिल्लो समयमा हामीले चाइनालाई ट्रेडिसनली भने पनि धेरै पुरानो होइन तर 4-5 दशक यता चाहिँ हामीले चाइनालाई एज ए अल वेदर फ्रेन्ड अनि चाइनाले पनि क्वाइट डिप्लोमेसी प्ले गर्छ भनेर बुझ्दै आएको कुरा गर्दै आएको। तर पछिल्लो समयमा मैले यसो हेर्दाखेरि चाहिँ चाइना आफैले त्यो 2वटा न्यारेटिभलाई चेन्ज गर्न खोजिरहेछ या चाइनाको एक्टिभिटीले त्यो चेन्ज भइरहेछ है। र चाइना आफैले नेपाललाई अर्थात् नेपालले चाइनालाई बुझ्दाखेरि वी आर नो अल वेदर फ्रेन्ड, हामी नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्टमा पुस गर्छौँ, हाम्रो नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्टको लागि हामी लबी गर्छौँ अर्थात् काम गर्छौँ भन्ने एउटा कुरा। र अर्को चाहिँ चाइना आफै पनि नेपालमा आलोचित हुन तयार भएको कि जस्तो देखिन्छ केही एक्टिभिटीले गर्दाखेरि। त्यही भएर मैले भन्न खोजेको चाहिँ मेरो पोइन्ट चाहिँ के हो भने चाइना आफैले त्यो रिस्क लिएको हो भने हामीले अहिले पनि चाइनालाई एज ए अल वेदर फ्रेन्ड मात्रै भन्ने कि चाइना जस्तो एम्बिसियस कन्ट्री र सुपर पावर बन्न खोजेको कन्ट्री भन्दाखेरि चाइनालाई हामी देउताको रूपमा मात्रै हेरेर चाहिँ यो अल वेदर फ्रेन्ड या चाहिँ क्वाइट डिप्लोमेसी प्ले गर्छ भने कि चाइनाको नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्ट के हो, हाम्रो चाइनासँगको इन्गेजमेन्ट के हो, यसबाट हामीले कसरी बेनिफिट लिने, चाइनाको पनि बेनिफिट छ, त्यसमा कसरी विन विन सिचुएसन, यसलाई ओपन र फ्र्याङ्क डिस्कसनको टपिक बनाउने नेपालमा। मेरो यति मात्रै क्वेसन हो, प्यानलमा जसले बोलिदिनु भयो भने हुन्छ। हस्, थ्याङ्क यू।
बौद्धिक लेभलमा असाध्यै धेरै कुराहरू सुनिन्छ। हाम्रो डाक्टर अच्युत वाग्लेको लेखमा करिब अनुकूल परेसम्म छुटाउँदैन, अत्यन्त बौद्धिक लेखहरू धेरै कुराहरू हुन्छन्। त्यस्तै अर्को डाक्टर वाग्ले स्वर्णिम वाग्लेजीको पनि त्यस्तै है, यहाँहरू सबै हुनुहुन्छ, यहाँ पार्टिसिपेन्ट सबै त्यस्तै विशिष्ट व्यक्तित्वहरू हुनुहुन्छ जहाँसम्म लाग्छ। र यी धेरै कुरा हाम्रो बोलीचाली र कागजका कुराहरू मात्रै भए व्यवहारमा हाम्रो केही पनि हुँदै भएन। समग्रमा हेर्दाखेरिमा हामी नेपालीहरू सच्चा मानिस बनेकै छैनौँ, देश राष्ट्र बनेकै छैन हाम्रो। यो अवयव सबै हेर्दा म त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालयमा करिब 30 वर्षदेखि प्राध्यापनरत छु। म त्यो पहिला प्रवेश गरेको दिन र आजको दिन सम्झन्छु। व्यवस्था सम्पूर्ण नेपाली जनताले चाहेका व्यवस्था यी 30-35 वर्षमा सबै प्राप्त गऱ्यौँ, तर त्यसको उपलब्धि के त हेर्दाखेरिमा हामी अपोजिट डिरेक्सनमा गएको जस्तो भान हुन्छ। भन्दा हाम्रो स्ट्राटेजी छैन। के छ त अरूलाई खुसी पार्ने नेसनल लेभलमा? म त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालयको एउटा प्राध्यापकको नाताले मैले त्यो सुधार्न सक्दिनँ, कतिपय कुरा भन्न सक्छु, त्यो गर्ने निकाय हुन्छ नि, गर्ने निकायले गर्दैन। भन्दा देशको बारेमा नि कुरो गर्दाखेरिमा हामी यहाँ उपस्थित व्यक्तिले कतिको प्रभाव पार्न सक्छौँ नेसनल लेभलमा, इन्टरनेसनल लेभलमा, आई डोन्ट नो। देशको लागि सबभन्दा पहिला सुध्रिनुपर्छ। देश नै देशलाई गभर्नेन्स गर्ने मान्छे। त्यसकारण मैले एउटा छोटो गरेँ।
तपाईँले जुन लास्ट भन्नुभयो नि आफै सुध्रिनुपर्छ भन्नु पनि
सबभन्दा पहिला आफू
1000 क्वेशनको एउटै एन्सर यही
हो।
थ्यांक यू।
त्यसकारण म 1 मिनेट लिन्छु। त्यसकारण अब फेडरल र यो प्रोभिन्स लेभलको चुनाव हुँदैछ। हामीले त हेऱ्यौँ त 30-35 वर्ष यिनै पार्टी यिनै मान्छे यिनै व्यक्तिहरूले देशलाई के सुधार गरे। हामी बुढा भइसक्यौँ विद्यार्थीबाट रिटायरमेन्टको टाइममा पुगिसक्यौँ। वाट वी गट एट द इन्ड। त्यस कारणले हामी सबै यहाँ उपस्थित व्यक्तित्वहरूले यो अहिलेको यो अवसरमा गतिला र देशलाई माया गर्ने बनाउने मान्छे अझै पनि ल्याउने सोच हामीले राखेनौँ र त्यता लागेनौँ भने हामी मात्रै होइन हाम्रा छोरा नातिले पनि यिनै कुरा।
अब छुट्याइदियो है।
हस् धन्यवाद।
मलाई टाइम किपरले यो टाइम सिद्धियो सर तपाईँको भनेर भनिसक्यो कि धन्यवाद तपाईँलाई। म पनि त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालयमै थिएँ त्यसैले मलाई पनि थाहा छ तपाईँले भन्नुभएको कुरो। म सर्टमा यो क्वेसनहरूको एकदम टु द पोइन्ट अपेक्षा फर्स्ट।
Right, so I think I'll just address the national interest. त्यो चाहिँ एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट कुरा हो है। मैले अघि नै भने इन्टर कन्ट्री पनि नेगोसिएसन्स हुन्छ र इट इज भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट टु नट ह्याभ अ डिभाइडेड हाउस वेन इट कम्स टु यर नेसनल इन्ट्रेस्ट एन्ड द्याट इज वाट गेट्स कम्प्लिकेटेड। द्याट हेज बिन कम्प्लिकेटेड फर नेपाल। अनि त्यसमा चाहिँ क्ल्यारिटी चाहियो कि अब झन् अगाडि बिकज जब इन्क्रिज अटेन्सन आउँछ अपर्च्युनिटिज पनि आउँछ। अहिले हामीसँग 3, 4, 5 जतिवटा पनि होइन चोइसेस अप्सन्स बढ्या छ तर आफ्नो इन्ट्रेस्ट क्लियर नभएसम्म लाइक आई सेड स्ट्राटेजिक इन्टरेक्सन गर्ने कि नन अलाइनमेन्ट भन्छु जे पोलिसी लिए पनि आफ्नो हाउस अर्डरमा नभएसम्म चाहिँ इट्स गोना बी भेरी डिफिकल्ट एन्ड डिप्लोमेटिक प्र्याक्टिसेस आर अफ कोर्स वान अफ दि मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेन्ट फ्याक्टर्स मुभिङ अहेड। म हस् म यति मात्रै भन्छु है। हस्
थ्याङ्क यू। एउटा क्वेसन दुईवटा क्वेसन डाक्टर नेचाईको। एउटा चाहिँ गठबन्धन संस्कृतिको बारेमा। मैले चाहिँ गठबन्धन संस्कृति संस्कार हुनुपर्छ भनेको होइन, खालि चाहिँ जियोपोलिटिक्सको कारण नेपालमा गठबन्धनको संस्कृति र संस्कार बढ्दै गएको हो कि भनेर एउटा ट्रेन्ड औँल्याएको मात्रै हो र यस्तै हुने हो जियोपोलिटिक्स भने भविष्यमा पनि गठबन्धनकै संस्कृतिले एउटा डोमिनेन्ट फर्म अफ गभर्नेन्स हुन्छ कि भनेर मैले औँल्याएको हुँ। अब यसको लागि के गर्ने भन्ने विषयमा त अब व्यापक छलफल आवश्यक छ। त्यसमा अब फाइनेन्सियल फ्लोजहरूको बारेलाई ट्र्याक गर्ने अलिकता नियमहरू नियामक निकायहरूले अलिकता फङ्सन गर्ने पोलिसिज र वातावरण बन्नुपर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। यस्तै अरू स्टेट इन्स्टिट्युसन्सहरू अलिकता वाचडग फङ्सन बलियो बनाउनु पर्छ जस्तो लाग्छ। अब यसमा अरू पनि धेरै सल्युसन्सहरू हुनसक्छ तर यो छलफलकै विषय छ जस्तो लाग्छ। थ्याङ्क यू।
धेरै क्वेसन आयो, धेरै बेर पनि भयो, धेरै लर्नेड इन्फर्मेसन आएछ। मैले धेरै यसमा एड गर्नुपर्ने छैन। एउटा कुरा चाहिँ गम्भीर रूपले फरेन पोलिसी बाहिर प्रोडक्टिभिटी हामी we have entered into the age of institutional degeneration. हाम्रो भएका संस्थाहरूको क्षयीकरण। अब हामी प्राध्यापक भन्छौँ हामीले पढाएको विद्यार्थीको सर्टिफिकेट छ सिप छैन भन्यो नि त। अब हामीले जहाँ बसे पनि भयो के भने सिप लिन चाहिने विदेश नै जाने भयो। वर्षमा 1.5 लाख चाहिँ सबभन्दा राम्रा भनेका विद्यार्थी विदेश गएर नफर्किने भयो। हामीले होप दिन सकेनौँ यो कन्ट्रीको। त्यसपछि हाम्रो यो इन्स्टिट्युसनल डिजेनेरेसनको जुन रेट छ त्यसलाई काहीँ न काहीँ रोक्नुपर्ने आवश्यकता छ। अब त्यसलाई चाहिँ रोक्न नसक्ने हो भनेदेखि धेरैवटा हामीले भनेका कुराहरूमा समस्या पर्न सक्छ। अब मैले धेरै लामो टाइम नलिकन के भनौँ भनेदेखि हाम्रो अहिले जुन डिरेक्सन छ, डिरेक्सन चाहिँ नि पोलिटिकल डिरेक्सन छ अथवा डिरेक्सनलेसनेस छ, डिरेक्सनलेसनेस छ। त्यसलाई चाहिँ करेक्ट गर्नुपर्छ। त्यो करेक्ट गर्ने केही न केही आज हामी यहाँ डिस्कसनमा बसेका छौँ। हामी पनि अब बाहिरै बसेका भएदेखि सायद सानोतिनो जागिर पाइन्थ्यो कि यहीँ आएर बसेर केही होला भनेर गर्दैछौँ। तर एउटै कुरा के हो भनेदेखि हाम्रो होल एस्पिरेसन चाहिँ नि म्यानेजिङमा भयो। हाम्रो लाइफ म्यानेज गरेर एउटा जति विद्वान भए पनि घर पहिले चाहियो, गाडी चाहियो, त्यसपछि हुन्छ सिद्धियो, एन्ड अफ इट। त्यसको जुन एकाडेमिक इनपुटहरूको पोलिसी मेकिङसम्म च्यानलाइज गर्ने त्यो जुन बाटो छ त्यो चाहिँ भाँचिएको अवस्था छ। अब होप छ अब केही यङ अब अपेक्षाजीहरू जस्तो यङ जेनेरेसनको यति इन्फर्म मान्छेहरू आएर काम गरिराख्नु भएको छ। अरू धेरै मान्छेहरू आउनु भएको छ। चेन्ज गर्नलाई मासले चेन्ज गर्ने होइन, एउटा दुईटा तीनटा लिडर्सले चेन्ज गर्ने हो। सेक्टरल लिडर्स, लिडर भने नट अलवेज द पोलिटिकल लिडर्स। त्यसो कारण धेरै पेसिमिस्ट पनि नहौँ। त्यही आशा हामीले के गरौँ भने म जहिले पनि भन्छु वी आर एट द मोस्ट सेकेन्ड जेनेरेसन अफ लिटरेट। म 10 वर्ष अगाडिसम्म फर्स्ट जेनेरेसन भन्थेँ, अहिले सेकेन्ड जेनेरेसनसम्म भन्न थालेको। किनभने नेपालमा चाहिँ नि विश्वविद्यालय स्थापना भएको 60 वर्ष पुगेको छैन। पहिलो विश्वविद्यालय भनेदेखि एकदमै चाँडै मौका पाउने मेरो बुवाहरूले पढ्नुभयो होला, त्यसपछि मैले पढेँ होला। नभएदेखि त म नै मेरो पुस्ता नै पहिलो साक्षर पुस्ता हो भनेदेखि जुन देश पनि विकसित भएको छ त्यो फर्स्ट जेनेरेसन अफ लिटरेटले गरेका छैन। यस्तै हो। अब अलिकति च्यालेन्जेसहरू छ, तर पनि जहाँ जहाँ सिरियस लुप होल्सहरू देखिया छ वी निड टु प्लग देम इन। थ्याङ्क यू।
धन्यवाद प्यानलका सबैलाई। र यहाँ भएका केही कुराहरूमा मेरो सानो टिप्पणी सहित यो सेसन म सिध्याउन चाहन्छु। ग्लोबल इन्टरनेसनल अर्डरमा पोस्ट सेकेन्ड वर्ल्ड वार र पोस्ट कोल्ड वार पछि जुन सिस्टमहरू बन्दै गयो त्यसमा स्ट्रेनहरू भएका छन्। राइज अफ चाइना र अरू पनि जुन इकोनोमीहरू डेभलप भएर आएका छन् त्यसले एक किसिमको भइरहेको छ। त्यो रिफ्लेक्सन नेपालमा डाइरेक्टली परिरहेको छ। यसका विभिन्न कारणहरू छन्, यहाँहरू सबैलाई थाहै छ। यही कारणहरू अल्झाउनलाई हामीले यो डिस्कसन राखेको हो कि नेपालले के गर्नुपर्छ। यो प्रश्न हामी सबैलाई उठिरहेछ। हाम्रो इन्स्टिट्युसनहरू कसरी हुनुपर्छ, हामीले कसरी नेगोसिएट गर्नुपर्छ। जुन किसिमले अघि बुद्धिनारायणजी या हाम्रो केशवजी या लेखनाथजीहरूले भन्नुभयो, यो जुन विभिन्न किसिमकाहरू पनि भन्नुभयो कसरी गर्ने भने चाहिँ गर्ने के हो भने देयर इज ए निड टु डिफाइन द रोल अफ इन्स्टिट्युसन्स, वेदर प्रेसिडेन्ट, फरेन मिनिस्ट्री, प्राइम मिनिस्टर, पोलिटिकल पार्टी लिडर्स, दे मस्ट अन्डरस्ट्यान्ड how to behave with the, how integrated behavior to show our partners. यहाँ सबैभन्दा अप्ठ्यारो हामीलाई कारणमा बारम्बार त्यो कुरा भन्छ। हाम्रो जुन डिभिजन देखिराखेको छ, कोही उत्तरतिर फर्किने, कोही दक्षिणतिर फर्किने, कोही पश्चिमतिर फर्किने, यसले चाहिँ नेपाललाई हित गर्दैन नै। हाम्रो चिन्ताको विषय पनि यही हो। हामी त्यसैले यो छलफल पनि राखेको कि कसरी इन्टिग्रेट गर्ने, कसरी इन्स्टिट्युसनहरू, प्रेसिडेन्ट अफिस भयो, प्राइम मिनिस्टर अफिस भयो, पार्लियामेन्ट भयो। There are a lot of challenges coming up. Lot of policies are coming. USA को पनि नयाँ आइरहेछ, इन्डिया को पनि नयाँ आइरहेछ, चाइना को पनि नयाँ आइरहेछ। सबैले ग्लोबली स्पेस खोजिरहेछ। इन दैट पोजिसन नेपालले कसरी त्यसमा म्याच गर्ने, नेपालले कसरी स्ट्रेटेजिकली मुभ गर्ने र नेपालको लागि ट्रेड, नेपालको लागि बेनिफिट, मार्केट कसरी लिन सकिन्छ, नेपालको आफ्नो इन्फ्रास्ट्रक्चर कसरी डेभलपमेन्ट गर्न सकिन्छ, यो नै छलफलको हाम्रो विषय थियो। यहाँहरू सबैलाई धन्यवाद। यहाँ सबै उपस्थित भइदिनु भएका सबै मित्रहरूलाई धन्यवाद। हामी यो प्यानल 10 मिनट जति ढिलो भएको छौँ। यहाँहरू सबैलाई चिया खाएर 10 मिनटभित्र 15 मिनटभित्रमा चिया लिएर बरु यहीँभित्र आएर खाँदा पनि हुन्छ। सेकेन्ड प्यानल सुरु हुन्छ। बहुत थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच।